a flowing silk dress in a soft spring green with a train that reaches to the floor, golden hair gathered in a loose hairstyle. The main character's appearance was unique and beautiful, with blue eyes like the purest sapphires, a sharp nose, and pink, alluring lips. She was so beautiful that it was impossible not to fall in love with her, and the main character was a respectable princess of the empire named Ivnes von Albion. Princess Ines appeared before the guests like a vision from a fairy tale dream, and the hall, bathed in the soft light of hundreds of candles, froze in anticipation. The princess ruled in the Albion Empire from the novel Flower of Tragedy. Her appearance before the guests was like the sunrise, dispelling the darkness and filling hearts with warmth. A noble young man with dark hair watched what was happening. He did not smile, did not exchange greetings with the other guests, remaining as if shrouded in an invisible aura of alienation. Princess Eve, the future ruler, embodied the hope and faith in the bright future of the kingdom, and right now the heroine is stuck in the body of a character from a novel. She stepped onto the marble floor, and the echo of her steps seemed to fill the space with melody. Her dress, woven from the finest silk, the color of moon silver, softly clung to her slender figure. As soon as the princess appeared before the guests, people made so much noise as if they were seeing a celebrity for the first time. But their looks were far from admiring, and there was genuine, pure fear on the guests' faces. The heroine did not know who Princess Ivnes was and what kind of person she was, but one thing was absolutely clear: everyone was madly afraid of her. Cruel, ruthless, and completely mad, she always caused a stir in the highest circles of the empire and was essentially a time bomb that could explode at any moment, especially considering all the horrors she had done in the last month, when she had thrown a tantrum right in front of the emperor, screaming and crying over the Grand Duke she was in love with. Although she had not even received permission for the wedding, she was already pestering and showing the maids to prepare for the events. And when she suspected other ladies of flirting with her man, she would literally pull out all the hair from the poor girls, even if these girls were innocent. Something terrible happened, and the Grand Duke eventually rejected her, after which Ivnes destroyed her entire room and then announced her hunger strike. To be honest, it was quite funny when the heroine read about it in the novel, but now she has become that very time bomb, and if it was a dream, she would have woken up long ago. But it had been 2 weeks since she had found herself in this place, and she had only had to come to terms with the fact that she had found herself in a romance. When the lady first woke up in her new life, she had absolutely no idea where she was or what was happening to her. Terrified that her hair had become a completely different color, she could not believe that in one moment she had become a different person. Ivnes remembered her past life a little, and that very night the heroine walked down a dark street all alone. As soon as she woke up, there was already a maid next to her who began to worry about her mistress, seeing her strange state. Turning to the lady, the maid called her "Your Highness." And at that moment, the heroine did not understand why they were addressing her so formally. As it turned out, the heroine became the noble daughter of His Majesty and the Emperor, the magnificent Princess Ivnes. It's good that she remembered about this affair and already knew who she was. Otherwise, people would have thought that the crazy princess had really gone crazy. Princess Ivnes approached the dark-haired boy, gliding easily between the couples, like a moonbeam breaking through the clouds. Stopping opposite him, the princess smiled warmly, admitting that she had long wanted to meet the venerable gentleman. As she approached, he straightened up slightly, and a shadow of surprise flashed in his eyes, followed by some kind of incomprehensible tension. After her sweet greeting, the young man immediately offered her his hand and asked if the princess would do her the honor of sharing the first dance with him. He extended his hand to her, and she touched it with her own, feeling a slight tingling sensation on her fingertips. There was a moment of silence in the room, as if everyone was holding their breath, watching this unexpected scene. He led her to the center of the hall, where the musicians were already waiting. The sounds of the violin and cello merged into an exciting melody, and they began to whirl in a dance. If it wasn't already obvious, this young man was the princess's hopeless passion, the Grand Duke of the Albion Empire named Terence Lenz. In the novel's plot, he became engaged to the princess because of her obsessive stalking, but in reality, he was the second main male character who would fall in love with the main character Sorel, and not with Villainess. Naturally, the Grand Duke was actually quite cold towards this girl, and during the dance, he asked the princess to relax, stating that she looked like she was going to her death row, not to the dance floor, where the main thing is relaxation and feeling the partner. The lady smiled at the Duke and joked that if she stepped on his foot, she could seriously fall over. The Duke appreciated the princess's funny joke and, unable to contain his emotions, laughed sweetly. He asked the girl why she would do something like that, since they both needed each other and their interest was mutual. But the heroine knew that he was blatantly lying here, and even if this was only a contractual relationship, she knew that when she stopped being useful to him, he could easily kill her, because he behaved politely in public, but she knew who he represented himself to be. Terence was a secret villain who pulled the strings from the shadows, and he rose to power by quietly eliminating countless people. The heroine was sure that a cold-blooded man like him was playing the role of a loving partner with a woman he couldn't stand and simply considered her useful. Now he was casually teasing her as a business partner should, and perhaps this was because the heroine remembered the whole story. But she couldn't resist his charming smile. Here it was the most dangerous, because in his predator's gaze, she was an ordinary victim, and smiling, he seemed to be playing with her. This union gave the heroine goosebumps, and it was too risky for her, but now she really had no other choice. So she, of course, touched the hand of the master, who believed that this girl was in his power. At this point, more than half of the plot had already been revealed, and the heroine was already somewhere busy with her holy deeds. As for Princess Even, all the people who were close to her hated her to the depths of their souls. If the heroine had been at the very beginning of the story, perhaps she could have saved her reputation, but everything around the princess had already turned into a real disaster. Just because things were a complete mess here, the heroine wasn't going to sit back and do nothing, knowing that the villainess was doomed to a cruel end. Despite the fact that she is the antagonist heroine, in the middle of the novel, on her wedding day, which was supposed to be the most beautiful day of her life, she is killed. On the day the heroine woke up in the body of a princess, according to the imperial calendar, it was the 10th of November, and there were exactly 44 days left until her wedding. In her past life, the heroine was an orphan who fought tirelessly for her survival. After graduating from college with difficulty, she finally found a job, but just when everything was starting to look up, she died in an accident. Now she knew that all the people in the novel hated her, and besides, she was supposed to be killed in less than a month and a half, and the heroine did not want to put up with her sad fate. She had no intention of dying in some tragic romance, and she wanted to survive, no matter the cost, even if she had to use the dangerous Duke for her own purposes. About 2 weeks ago, immediately after her rebirth, the heroine was in a luxurious palace, sipping aromatic tea. She was in the company of respectable ladies, and one of them was the majestic Empress herself, or rather her stepmother. The Empress asked what brought the girl to tea, since she had recently said that she did not have to come here. The princess never tolerated impudence and rudeness and behaved with dignity no matter how she was treated. She stated that her mother had invited her herself, and she could in no way refuse her such a request, despite the fact that she did not want to come here at all. The noble princess of the Villainess Empire had a violent temper that grew stronger with each passing day. All the maids of the palace were incredibly afraid of her, because no one could know what to expect from this girl, who could get angry at any moment. But now the princess turned out to be a completely different person, and suddenly she became very kind and gentle. To be more precise, the changes began after a serious hunger strike and her illness. When the heroine woke up, noticing her condition, she suggested calling a doctor when the princess said that she didn't remember anything at all. But Villainess asked the maid not to tell anyone, because if this information came to light, she might have problems with the wedding. With tears in her eyes, she asked the maid to keep the secret a secret, and under no circumstances to tell anyone about her memory loss. The maid was worried that the princess might start making mistakes because of her amnesia, but in reality she became even more well-mannered and gentle. She didn't know how she should think, but she noticed a change in the princess with amnesia, who treated everyone with respect, which had never happened before. In a gentle voice, the princess asked the maid to pack the tea leaves, which were carefully placed in an exquisite box. At the tea party, the empress presented Villainess with a box of random leaves brought from the north as a token of gratitude for her invitation. But despite the pleasant gift, the empress's face remained gloomy, and she coldly appreciated the pleasant aroma of the tea. The noble ladies silently watched the conversation between the princess and the empress, afraid to even move. One of the girls imagined that because of the princess, the meeting seemed even more radiant. And it would be wonderful if another princess named Sorel also joined them, but now she was very far away. There were battles going on in the empire, and the outcome was still uncertain, which caused incredible anxiety among all the inhabitants. All the ladies hoped and worried that the princess would return soon safe and sound. But only the heroine knew that these girls continued to remember another princess and thus tried to piss her off. One day, as in a fairy tale, the daughter of the great emperor appeared, the main character of the novel, named Lady Sorel. When everyone praised her powerful healing abilities, Inessa's weak foresight was pushed into the background, considered banal. Thus, the forgotten Princess Villainess assuaged her grievances by mocking another princess, Sorel. Therefore, when the ladies began to remember her and speak directly in front of the heroine, it was incredibly expected that she would lose her composure and make a scandalous scene. The empress, who considered Villainess her main obstacle, tried to score at least a few points at every reception. But the heroine had no intention of playing to their tune, and this was the last thing she wanted to do when she found herself in a new life. She confidently stated that no one should worry about the battles in the empire because the Albion Empire would definitely win, and the princess needed to ensure her own survival first. Everyone was incredibly hopeful of winning, but the ladies didn't know if there was any particular reason why Villainess was so confident. The princess admitted that she heard that the command had been entrusted to the youngest prince, and that people were probably trying to remove him from the line of succession, but most likely the prince would not even receive support. In their case, the emperor was in direct control, so Villainess was confident that the empire had great advantages in terms of power. The empress noticed that the princess seemed to be well informed about the events of the empire and had studied quite a lot. She admitted that the Grand Duke must have already acknowledged this side, and there was only a month left before the wedding, and the groom had not yet appeared at the party. The empress said that his actions were too heartless, but the princess knew that it was all too ridiculous, because even if she behaved intelligently, she would still remain a wretched woman who was ignored by her own fiancé. The empress asked the Duchess of Rohan, the Grand Duke's aunt, to talk about the princess and their upcoming wedding. Now all the ladies began to timidly pity the princess, but she didn't care at all because she still hoped to turn the conversation towards the Duke. Villainess noted with a smile that everything is fine. There are many couples who become closer after marriage. The empress had heard that the Grand Duke despised mistresses and would never have agreed to such a thing. She replied that in order for her wearing to be distracted by nothing else, she would try and believe that they could become a loving couple. Once upon a time, the lady turned from a concubine into an empress and had to keep this shame to herself. But Villainess wanted to understand this in more detail. And come to think of it, she'll have to move to the duchy after the wedding, once she and Terence are married. The emperor must have ordered the empress to keep an eye on her, as she would be easier to deal with if she didn't wander around outside. Villainess asked that before she left, she would like to visit the temple in advance and pray for the safe return of His Majesty. It just so happens that this is also the Enchi festival, so Villainess would also like to offer a prayer for the late empress. But if she pretends to be an obedient daughter, since so many people are watching her, the empress will have no choice but to agree. The empress replied that the girl had a beautiful heart and gave her consent, warning that she could go wherever she wanted. She admitted that the emperor would also be pleased with her action, and the princess thanked her mother for her consent. Now she was going to be a good daughter to fulfill all her goals and not die a tragic death. The girl left the tea party, and one of the ladies asked if the princess had finally grown up. And it seems that everyone already knows that the Grand Duke will also be at the temple for the magnificent celebration. For the Empress and other ladies, this was very strange, because the princess, who had never even thought about such a thing before, suddenly decided to pray. But everyone was sure that whether she would cling to His Grace the Duke or make a scene, Villainess would still return completely humiliated in front of everyone. Soon the carriage, together with the heroine, set out for the capital of the empire so that she could attend a magnificent celebration. The princess had no idea what might await her, but this time she had to believe only in her own strength. The festival of Enshi is a time to honor the souls of the dead, and every year at this time, the temple is visited by His Grace Duke Terence. It was with him that the princess was supposed to meet in the temple because the Grand Duke never approached the imperial palace. And this time the Empress, by pure chance, took the bait. But there was no guarantee that this basis would work. Right now, the only person who could help her was the Grand Duke, but she didn't know how willing he would be to listen to her, but she was going to give him something. She was sure that after that, he wouldn't be able to refuse. Legend has it that on this day the dead heard the living, as well as their requests and prayers, but there was nothing special in the temple ritual. To pay homage to the deity, jade beads that once belonged to the Empress were left on the altar. A short prayer was all that was needed, so the princess went to the main statue and asked that everything go smoothly. There was a maid next to the princess who sneezed and asked her mistress for forgiveness. But for some reason, the maid's face was incredibly worried. She asked if everything was okay. She began to worry that the princess was praying without gloves, and her hands were completely bare. The previous heroine was always obsessed with cleanliness, so wherever she went, she always wore gloves, and the lady admitted that she was a little hot because she always kept her classes closed. Villainess didn't even leave the house without gloves, and at that time it was not so much a quirk as something that required treatment. In her case, there was another reason why she completely forgot to take gloves this time. It was all about the princess's ability to foresee, and the weak power was directly related to the gloves. In the original story, the princess rarely used her ability and stopped using her sacred power since childhood because she felt like she had completely lost it. But the truth was that she simply didn't know under what conditions her power could be activated. And the main condition was bare hands, because using the ability required direct contact. A priest approached Villainess and informed her that an elderly man had to come personally to greet her. The man said that believers had gathered here to receive blessings ahead of the holy day. This man turned out to be the high priest, and smiling, the princess admitted that she was very pleased to meet the high priest. In his eyes, the princess was no different from an evil spirit. She must have bothered him many times over the years. Young men in black suits arrived at the temple, holding a large chest in their hands. The young men were the princess's assistants, and the high priest did not understand what all this could mean. The man's sullen gaze was not long in coming, and looking at the young men who entered, he noticeably became wary. There were jewels in the chest, and the princess said that she would like to donate all these jewels to the temple. The high priest could not believe that the girl was willing to give so much to charity, because no one had ever made such large donations before. He silently looked at the princess and expected a trick, knowing her capricious character and reputation. But the lady smiled and said that she would like to ask the high priest for just one small favor. The princess's goal was not money at all, and in order to get the desired flower, she had to climb to the very top. The bouquet of white flowers she collected was very precious to her, but this bouquet was not at all simple. In a conversation with the high priest, the princess asked for forgiveness, stating her desire. She said that she needed a flower from a sacred tree, and that was her only condition in exchange for the donation. Despite all the years of service of the high priest, no one was allowed to pick the flowers of the sacred tree at will. The lady, upset, admitted that she was probably asking too much, since this tree was sacred and revered. But everyone knew about Villainess's cruel nature, and even the temple servants were afraid to make the princess look unhappy by deciding to give her this flower of the sacred tree. Some were even afraid that Villainess could destroy the temple at any moment, because that was exactly what she used to do if she didn't like something. So the high priest agreed to her conditions and said that the girl could go and take the sacred flower. In any case, Eve's infamous reputation finally came in handy for the princess. The lady carefully collected the flowers of the sacred tree, and the snow-white bouquet was ready. Now it was necessary to make the only choice. But as she was heading back to the temple, something interesting caught her eye. She noticed a group of young men heading towards the temple, and the uniforms they were wearing belonged to the Grand Duke's knights. Villainess considered it incredible luck that she managed to cross paths with the venerable gentleman, since it was his assistants who were now heading to the temple. Lady Villainess froze at the entrance to the temple, as if struck by lightning. She had heard about the Duke, his beauty and composure, but seeing him in person was completely different. He was not just handsome, he was magnificent. The Duke was said to be the most handsome man on the continent, and as soon as the princess saw him, she knew he was even better than rumor had described him. Tall, stately, with a proud bearing, he towered over the crowd like an ancient god descended from heaven. He walked slowly towards her, his every movement filled with grace and confidence, and Eve's heart pounded wildly in her chest, and she couldn't move, as if enchanted. There was only one person she could turn to for help now, and as the Duke approached her, she greeted him with a gentle smile. Holding a snow-white bouquet in her hands, she confessed that she had prepared the flowers from the sacred tree as a gift, and there were only 2 people who had truly suffered after the princess's death. By putting a small note in the bouquet, she wanted to present it to the Duke as a sign of recognition. And the second person who suffered from the death of the princess was the Grand Duke, who stood right in front of her. The lady admitted that she had no ulterior motive. She just wanted to apologize for what happened. Therefore, in order to survive in the princess's body, she must explain herself to the Duke and ask him for help. Villainess decided to apologize for having behaved extremely stupidly earlier and said that it was probably too late for an apology, but she would still like to offer one. She was sure that the Duke should understand her because just recently she had become a different person. The young man asked what exactly the girl was talking about, recalling the incident when she threw a glass sculpture at a man standing next to him. He also recalled that one day a lady mistook his assistant for a woman, then attacked him with her fists, and the atrocities described in the main story were just the tip of the iceberg. The young man refused to take the bouquet, but decided to accept the princess's apology by offering to give the bouquet to someone else. He said nothing more and left with his assistants, stating that they would see each other on the wedding day. But the princess did not expect such a turn of events, and loudly shouted that he had no right to do this, because this was the order of the princess herself. In response to this, the Duke only looked coldly in her direction, hearing indignation. He probably wasn't going to leave just like that, and the words that he was obliged to carry out her order didn't please the young man at all. Villainess understood that she had no choice, because if the Duke left now, they would both soon be doomed. The Duke stopped right in front of her, his shadow covering her, and she looked up, meeting his gaze. The princess stated that their conversation was not over at all, and that leaving before the lady was a great breach of etiquette. She couldn't be afraid now, because for her it was a matter of life and death, and the formidable Duke asked if she had decided to give him a lecture on etiquette. His eyes said that he couldn't be treated like that, and his assistants decided that the princess had gone completely crazy. Villainess closed her eyes and understood that she could expect the Duke's wrath, but now she was ready for anything. She apologized if she had offended the Duke in the past and asked him to give her some more of his time. A tense pause hung over the heroes. The Duke's assistants were waiting to see how this conversation would end. For some reason, the Duke suddenly fell silent, and the princess could not find a place for herself, looking down so as not to meet his cold gaze under any circumstances. She was afraid that the Duke had noticed that she was not acting like the previous cruel princess. Since the princess insisted, the Duke admitted that he would like to hear how important this conversation was. And his answer turned out to be extremely friendly, and the heroine realized that her efforts had not been in vain. Finally, she had a wonderful chance that she couldn't miss, and holding a bouquet in her hands, she admitted that she brought these flowers not only to apologize. In 2 weeks, the anniversary of the death of the late Archduchess was to take place. Frowning, the Duke rudely asked what this had to do with the princess, since they were not connected in any way. Villainess confessed that the Archduchess was her godmother and that she was soon to marry her son. Villainess remembered reading about it in a novel, and she had some idea about the deceased lady. She admitted that the lady had been so kind to her when she was little, and that was why, with the permission of the high priest, she had brought some flowers from the sacred tree, because the Archduchess was very fond of them. Whenever she visited the temple hall, she often admired the flower garden, and the Duke knew this as well. Therefore, the princess asked to accept a bouquet of sacred flowers, because if she went there herself, his lordship might not like it. She handed the young man a bouquet and admitted that he could probably put them on the grave instead of her. Trying to do her best, the princess waited for Terence's answer, hopefully that he would be favorable to her. As she insisted, the Duke nobly consented to accept the bouquet and extended his hand. Finally, the heroine managed to achieve her goal, and she happily presented the Duke with a beautiful bouquet of sacred flowers. As long as the young man accepts the flowers, she will not care whether he scolds her or calls her shameless. She asked that the bouquet be kept nearby and well looked after so that the flowers would not fall off by the time of the memorial ceremony. But the Duke did not yet know that there was a small note hidden in the bouquet, which he would only learn later. The princess really hoped that the young man would find the tiny note that she had hidden especially for him among the petals. After meeting with the Duke, the maid approached the lady and asked how she was feeling. Villainess suggested returning to the palace, since it would be better if she remained alive and the Duke was not mistakenly accused of murder. Leaving the majestic temple, the lady approached the snow-white carriage to go home to the palace. Suddenly, a voice of a noble lady was heard asking the princess to stay for a while. The lady thought that the princess had already returned to the palace, but she considered it a great blessing that she had not left yet. This lady turned out to be the Duchess of Rohan herself, whom the princess had already met at the Empress's tea party. She greeted the Duchess and was glad to meet her, for Rohan was a very intelligent and gracious woman. She also noticed that the princess had forgotten to put on her gloves, as everyone knew about her passion for cleanliness. Unfortunately, Villainess couldn't tell her that it was her key to divine power, and she confessed that she had just received a flower from a sacred tree that was best held with bare hands. Having heard about the flower of the sacred tree, the Duchess was incredibly surprised, because they could not just be picked. While giving her mother's things to the temple, the princess also donated some of her own jewelry. She did not do this expecting anything in return, but the high priest graciously allowed her to take some flowers from the sacred tree. The Archduchess's funeral was due to take place in 2 weeks, so the princess expressed her desire to lay flowers on her grave. Hearing this, the Duchess smiled and felt that the princess had an incredibly kind heart. She thanked the girl because her sister would be truly happy if she knew that even after her death she was being taken care of so much. The Duchess probably thought that the wedding was approaching and the princess needed to win the Duke's favor. The Duchy of Rohan did not play a major role in the original story, and the heroine knew it. The Duchess appeared only occasionally with the Duke, but the rest of the family were only briefly mentioned in connection with the wedding. Usually a close friend of the bride acts as a bridesmaid at the wedding, but the princess had no friends, and the role of bridesmaid was given to the Archduke's cousin and Rohan's only daughter, a girl named Diana. Diana secretly had feelings for the princess's brother, the crown prince, so according to the original novel, she was happy to become a bridesmaid. However, according to the plot, Diana's condition suddenly worsened, which is why she was unable to attend the wedding. It was said that she had often been ill since childhood, and if the Duke's daughter were to be near Inessa on her wedding day, perhaps it could help her somehow. The maids who were with Willow on the day of her death remained on the sidelines, and none of them were able to provide assistance. The princess inquired how the Duchess's daughter was doing. Knowing that she would not be able to become a bridesmaid due to illness, nothing could be done about it. The Duchess said Diana's health had improved recently, and she was looking forward to her wedding day. This meant that if the girl suggested getting ready, then her illness had not yet worsened. The heroine did not expect when exactly Diana's condition would worsen. Suddenly, the Duchess handed the girl a handkerchief with gold embroidery and asked her to accept it generously. The princess was a little surprised because this gesture from the Duchess could mean more than a simple gift. It was a handkerchief imbued with warming magic. The Duchess said that if you hold it in your hands, it will quickly warm you up. Since Diana easily caught colds in the winter, she took care of the princess's health by presenting her with a magic handkerchief. The Duchess was incredibly kind, and the princess could not believe that such a noble lady was the Archduke's aunt. The lady lightly touched the silk snow-white scarf, thanking the Duchess for the wonderful gift. But as soon as she touched it, something strange began to happen to her, and the princess clearly understood that something was wrong here. Princess Villainess felt like she had been transported to another reality. The world she knew seemed to melt away like the morning mist. Suddenly, she found herself in a room where a maid was standing next to some lady's bed. The princess could not understand anything because she had just been in the garden, and there was probably hidden magic present here. She saw that the maid carefully offered the girl the medicine that she was constantly supposed to take. She watched silently as the lady asked the maid with complete confidence if it was time to take her medicine. The maid picked up a tray with a glass in her hands, and the princess managed to see how she added something to the medicine. It was obvious because the maid had just added some powder to the mistress's water, and the very next second after the girl drank the contents of the glass, scarlet drops of blood appeared on her lips, and she began to cough violently. Panic broke out among the maids because the mistress was coughing up blood, and they tried to call a doctor as quickly as possible. All this time, the princess was in the room, and it was as if she saw a completely different reality, in which she definitely should not have found herself now. The princess witnessed how the girls rushed to help Diana, who suddenly began to choke on her own blood. Mother immediately ran to Diana, seeing that her daughter had suddenly become ill, and there were traces of blood on her clothes. It was a huge tragedy for the family, because no one could understand why Diana suddenly became ill. That evening, the princess was riding in her carriage, and her thoughts were haunted by the vision she had witnessed. Silently looking out the window, the princess could not understand what had happened and why she had seen this scene. But what she saw then never left her thoughts, because it couldn't have just happened. The heroine could not understand how she had moved to another reality, because she clearly remembered that she had talked to the Duchess. She didn't show that she saw something strange when she touched the handkerchief, while the Duchess looked closely at the princess. It was such a real vision that the princess seemed to see the future, and at that moment, she was right in that room. As she thought, she was the only one who saw this terrible incident, and this meant only one thing. The princess's unique ability to foresee has finally been activated, and she has now fully regained her powers. Moreover, recalling the vision she had seen, she clearly remembered the girl with brown hair, who was Diana, the Duchess's daughter. The maid added something strange to the medicine, and after Diana drank it, the girl started coughing like a mother-in-law. The princess suggested that it was most likely not poison, since in the original story she did not die, and perhaps they slipped something into her drink to worsen her health. If it weren't for this, Diana would have been Evans's bridesmaid, as originally planned. But the place that was in the vision was clearly the Duke's mansion, and everyone who appeared with the Duchess was dressed in formal attire for the ball. In that case, this vision showed what happened on the eve of the ball in the Duke's mansion, and now only the princess was a witness to the terrible tragedy. She was still standing with the Duchess in the garden, and was afraid to ask her something to find out some details. Villainess asked the Duchess if there was any ball planned at the Duke's estate. Trying to somehow hide the truth, she said that she had heard from some other noble lady that the Duke's family was planning to hold a ball soon. As it turned out, the ball was planned for the evening of the 1st, the birthday of the Duchess's daughter. The heroine was incredibly lucky because she managed to find out information that would help her in the future. The Duchess said that this will be the first ball to take place this winter. It is an annual family holiday, so they cannot postpone it. Indeed, it seems a little strange to hold a ball under such circumstances, since the emperor has left and the duke has been away for a long time. Since the duke could not attend, the duchess insisted that he attend this time, as he had not attended a family celebration for many years. The princess asked if she could have an invitation, admitting that she would like to thank Lady Diana in advance. The duchess knew that it would be a great honor for them if the princess herself attended the event. Villainess was delighted and asked the duchess not to worry, promising to behave quietly so as not to disturb the other guests. Therefore, for a long time, the princess kept replaying this conversation in her memory, until the maid said that Allie would soon move to live in another estate. She admitted that perhaps the lady should put on her coat, and the princess was very surprised. The maid carefully wrapped the girl in a warm fur coat, and the princess asked if Diana was really very ill. She said that Lady Diana suffers from chronic illnesses, which is why she cannot participate in public events. As it turns out, Diana suffers from a rash on her body, which is why the previous princess insisted that she wear a dress with a high collar. Hearing this, Villainess couldn't believe her own ears, because now she definitely wouldn't dare say such a thing to her friend. Now she understood what kind of character the past heroine had, why everyone treated her like that. Another precious, eventful day had passed, and there were only 39 days left until the wedding. The heroine felt as if she was participating in a survival game, where every day she had to fight for the right to live. And if she doesn't find a way to survive before the allotted time disappears soon, then she will die in this exciting game. But be that as it may, the princess managed to forcibly hand the flowers to the duke, and her first goal was achieved. From now on, everything will depend on how much the duke will trust her now. If all went smoothly, she might be able to meet his lordship again tonight, but given how he had behaved before, it was unlikely that anything would work out. Returning home and taking a hot bath, the princess thought that she had still been very sincere and hoped for a better outcome. The maids carefully combed the girl's hair after she took a hot bath and also prepared her for bed. Today the heroine was incredibly tired, so she decided that she should immediately go and rest. During all this time, the princess behaved very calmly, and the maids noticed that her highness had changed a lot and had become kind. Midnight fell over the empire, but on this unusual night, one of the temples was not empty. A young man in a dark cloak stood inside the temple, waiting for the very meeting that was soon to take place. It was Duke Terence who was in the temple at that time for a reason, and he had an appointment late at night. The door of the temple opened, and in the silence of the night, a princess in an emerald robe appeared. Ivan smiled and greeted the duke, glad that he had come after all, and not ignored her request. The young man said that he had been standing there for a long time, but the princess knew that this could not be true. He said that it was already past midnight, but the heroine was sure that she had arrived on time, and she couldn't believe that he was seriously upset that she was only 2 minutes late. It took the princess some time to get here unnoticed, and she asked to meet the duke here because she wanted to tell him something important. What she was about to say might surprise the venerable gentleman, but he said that he had received a note that already contained something shocking. The note stated that a sword was hidden in the sheath of the statue in the western garden, and the duke did not expect that the princess might know anything about the lost sacred relic. The lost relic was a magical sword that was a sacred memory of the empire. This sword originally belonged to the Archduke's family, but 10 years ago it was stolen and disappeared without a trace. Until this point, the Duke had no idea where he was, and in fact, this secret was revealed in the last part of the original novel. So now the young man was very curious about how the princess knew about this, because no one had this information. He probably wanted to know the truth, because Villainess certainly couldn't have known about the stolen relic. The princess felt that the Duke was more interested in where the rest of the stolen sword was, so she told the whole truth to the Duke, confessing that she knew all the details very well. Villainess stated that it was for this very reason that the Duke was obliged to help her, or in that case, she would tell the whole truth. She did not hide it, and confessed that on the day of the wedding she was to be killed, while the Duke did not understand what was being discussed. The princess also said that it was the Duke who would be accused of this crime, but this would only happen in the future. She told the Duke the whole truth, expecting that he would at least try to understand and help her. The Duke knew, of course, that the princess was a cruel and self-centered person, but he could not believe the nonsense she had just told. The princess assured him that she was not crazy at all, and was not trying to deceive him, and everything she said was the complete truth. Villainess said that she saw a future in which His Majesty the Emperor would kill her with magical power. The Duke heard that the girl had lost her gift as a child and no longer had magical abilities. All this time, the heroine thought exactly the same, but suddenly the power returned to her after the engagement, and the Duke assumed that she had found the location of the lost relic thanks to the returned power. The princess said that she saw a future in which a sacred relic was shown, although in fact she read it in a novel. The Duke wanted to know why she had not announced the return of her power, but the princess warned that if she told the truth, people would become wary of her. But now he couldn't understand why the girl calmly told him about this, and as expected, this man didn't trust her at all. The heroine asked for help, stating that she could be useful to his lordship in revealing the truth. If she manages to reveal the Emperor's plans while hiding her foresight, the Grand Duke will not help, and instead he will let her die, and then after her death, he will present the evidence he has collected to clear himself of any blame. In that case, he would be able to eliminate the Emperor and the annoying bride, if this could be a great opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. Therefore, the princess understood that now she had to prove her worth to him by promising to use her abilities to help the Duke. Earlier, the girl said that thanks to her power, she can see the future, connected with the wedding day. He asked if she had any evidence to support this information, but she promised that in 5 days the Duke would find out everything himself. On the morning of the 5th day, a solar eclipse will begin, although in the original story, this only happened because the heroine Sorrel awakened the sealed divine beast. If the girl had the gift of foresight, the Duke asked her to tell him what he would wear at their wedding, to make sure that her words were true. Just yesterday, the butler suggested that the young man prepare a wedding suit for the ceremonial wedding. But suddenly, he asked to prepare another outfit, which only he knew about. This time, the Duke decided to wear a black court ceremonial robe, which was a radical departure from the rules of wedding attire. He told the butler about it in the morning, and knew that if the princess was lying, she would never know what he would be wearing on his wedding day. The princess said that the Duke would arrive at the wedding wearing a black ceremonial robe, and at that moment, the Duke fell silent. He couldn't understand how the girl managed to find out about this, because no one except him knew this information. It certainly couldn't be a coincidence, so he asked the princess to tell him what would happen to him tonight. Villainess asked if the young man really wanted her to foresee the events of today right now. But that was a shame, because the original story said absolutely nothing about tonight. So she admitted that she was very sorry and that she couldn't do it now because it wasn't something she could see on command, and she was sure that the Duke didn't believe her. But it was a do-or-die situation, and the princess agreed to try. She asked the Duke to give her his hands so that she could hold his palms for a minute. The princess hoped that the young man would not misunderstand her, because in order to use her power, she needed direct contact. The Duke had no choice but to agree, and he extended both hands, placing them on the girl's palm. She prayed that everything would work out for her now, and her gift of foresight did not fail her, because a lot depended on it now. Concentrating, the princess closed her eyes and tried to immerse herself in her sensations. She managed to see something. When she opened her eyes, she realized where the Duke would be this evening. She saw the table where the other young men were sitting and was very glad that she had succeeded. The princess needed to return from the ritual with solid evidence, and to do so as soon as possible. She looked at the Duke carefully, trying to figure out what she should tell him so that he would believe her. Standing as if rooted to the spot, she stared at the Duke's face and only sighed heavily after the introduction. The Duke asked her what she had managed to see, but the girl did not immediately find what to answer him. She said she saw the Duke holding a set of cards, one with hearts and one with clover leaves, and they were sevens. Having heard this information, the Duke thought about it, because the pair of sevens meant nothing to him. The estate had been busy preparing for the southern region recently, so the Duke had warned that he must leave for battle immediately after the wedding. And he was more than sure that in times like these, he had absolutely no time for playing cards or anything like that. It is quite possible that the Duke could not know for sure what would happen that evening, and the princess's words would turn out to be true. Villainess insisted that the Duke believe her because she could not see what could not happen. So she begged the Duke to believe, and he himself offered to see what was to happen that evening. Terence thought for a moment and promised that he was ready to believe her words, but only until tomorrow morning. The lady thanked the young man for the meeting, and since it was already late at night, she needed to return to the palace. The Duke suddenly grabbed the princess by the hand. The gesture was so sudden and abrupt that the princess screamed in surprise. The princess felt a chill run down her spine, her intuition telling her that something sinister was happening here, and this sudden impulse of the Duke was not just a whim, but an act of protection. A look of fear or despair flashed in the Duke's eyes, and without saying a word, he pressed the princess to himself. There was a tension in the air, as if before a thunderstorm, and she could only feel how tightly the Duke held her and how his heart was beating, tapping out an anxious rhythm. It was not in vain that the Duke grabbed and hugged the girl, because now she definitely heard some footsteps approaching. The steps did not seem like anything to anyone, and indeed the next second a young man appeared in front of the heroes. This young man turned out to be the main character of the novel, named Michael Sheldon, who was certainly supposed to play a big role in the fate of the princess. Michael was the second in command of the Royal Knights of the Albion Empire and was the main protagonist of this novel. But his appearance was completely unexpected because no one could have known that the Duke and Princess had a meeting scheduled at that time. Mikhail immediately realized that he was not alone in the temple, so he shouted loudly and asked to admit who else was there besides him. The young man immediately grabbed the sword, ready to draw it and attack at any moment, while the Duke and Princess stood silently in a dark corner. They heard that Mikhail asked the people who were in the building besides him to leave immediately, and the princess had absolutely no idea what she should do now and how to behave before the unexpected meeting. The Duke asked the girl to close her eyes for a moment, and for some reason, at that moment, she trusted him, even though she didn't know what he was going to do. Pressing the girl tightly to himself, the Duke suddenly grabbed his sword, because they could be in danger at any moment. Ivans told the young man not to use weapons under any circumstances, but at that moment they were already noticed. And this voice was already familiar to Mikhail, and the princess only had to turn around and greet him in such an unexpected setting. Seeing the heroes, Mikhail asked why they were there and who the man was standing next to the princess. Not knowing what to say to her at all, the lady just smiled sweetly, looking at the Duke, who was still holding the sword in his hands. He could tell from the girl's eyes that it was probably a weapon before he rushed to attack Mikhail. The young man put the sword back and let go of the handle, which he had been holding tightly until then, trusting the princess and her words. They had to play out a scene in which Michael would not understand anything, so the Duke asked if the young man had interrupted a personal meeting, he should probably start with an apology. Having embraced the princess, the Duke turned to Sheldon, who allegedly caught them by surprise and interrupted their conversation. Feeling tense, the princess did not understand why the Duke had decided to take this particular position. Hearing his words, Mikhail apologized, assuring that he had not expected anything at all about their personal meeting. There was nothing to be done, and the princess understood that it was better for her to agree with the Duke, asking Mr. Michael to keep their private meeting, which he had seen, a secret. The princess smiled and admitted that in that case, she would also keep the secret of the third brick, and probably Mikhail understood what was being discussed. The third brick was in the center of the left stone wall in the northern storage room, and Mikhail knew about it. It was there that Michael and Lady Sorrel secretly exchanged letters, sometimes about everyday life in the palace, and at other times they exchanged important information. Of course, these were only secrets between Mikhail and the girl, but the princess decided to use this trump card to make him keep quiet. After all, she understood perfectly well that if the truth came out, they would both be in trouble, and Mikhail could not allow this. Michael realized that he was trying to win the princess and swore on his honor to keep silent about what he had seen. The princess thanked the young man, deciding to say goodbye because the Duke promised to see her off, and she really hoped that Mikhail would leave now. The young man decided to take his leave and said goodbye to the heroes, and the princess finally exhaled because they had succeeded. The Duke found this situation astonishing, since the princess even knew the weakness of the deputy commander of the guard, whom the emperor trusted. The lady stated that today's incident cannot become public knowledge, and Mikhail is the man who evaluates loyalty. The princess was outraged that a couple of minutes ago the Duke was going to kill him, and he even confirmed that if the princess was afraid of Mikhail, he could eliminate him. The Duke claimed he was merely warming up to lightly hit him with a tranquilizer-coated blade to render him unconscious. And she couldn't believe that Terence, who was standing next to her seriously, was Mikhail's free brother. In fact, Michael was born to a former archduke and a servant, and was an illegitimate child. As a result, Mikhail's mother, being an ordinary servant, was abandoned by the Duke, and the young man still does not know who his real father is. In the original novel, Duke Terence is aware of this fact, but tries to remain indifferent to the story. Of course, from his point of view, Mikhail is perceived too favorably, but nevertheless, this young man was not guilty of anything. The princess said that it would be better if they each went their separate ways now, since they could not risk being seen together again. The Duke realized that they really shouldn't reveal the truth, so he decided to take his leave and say goodbye to the princess. Bowing politely, the lady thanked the young man and promised that they would definitely see each other soon. A large moon was shining above the palace, and it seemed that the moon, majestically sitting above the palace, was not just a silent witness, but also a participant in the events taking place. When the Duke arrived at the palace, he decided that playing cards was just a waste of time. Who would do that at such a time? But what kept on his mind was the fact that the princess certainly didn't look like she was trying to deceive him. And even if her words were a lie, he decided to conduct an investigation on the part of the emperor. Terence walked into the living room, and to his great surprise, his little brother named Lot was sitting at the table. The boy had playing cards in his hands and was waiting for his brother to play a card game in which players compete to match colors and numbers. Lord Camion was standing next to him, and the Duke angrily asked what the knight was doing here at such a late hour when the battle was almost at the door. The gentleman thought that the boy was bored, so he decided to play cards with him, and Lot, seeing his brother, asked him to join in. There were playing cards on the table, and the brother enthusiastically asked Terence to play with him. At that moment, the Duke remembered the words of the princess, who told about the cards, where one had hearts, the other with clover leaves. And that is why the Duke decided to test whether her words were true by agreeing to play a card game. The young man suggested shuffling the cards, and Lot asked with interest whether the princess would move only after the wedding. The boy prepared the model as a wedding gift. He wanted to show it to the princess as soon as she arrived at the mansion. That's why he decided to ask when Ivness would move in with them so that he could finally meet her. Come to think of it, the Duke still hadn't thrown away the flowers that the princess asked him to put on his mother's grave. And since he found the note, he decided that there was no harm or benefit from this bouquet, but for some reason he didn't want to throw it away. Slowly taking out the card, Lot asked his brother if he thought the princess would like his gift. The young man stroked his brother's head because he had put his whole soul into the gift, and in any case, the princess would like it. While the heroes were busy playing, suddenly one of them collected cards of the same color and won. But the lot was close, and he needed only one card to win the card game. The Duke suggested ending the game for today, promising that next time he would definitely play with his brother, but it was already late today and time to sleep. He dismissed the knight who was looking after his brother and thanked him for his excellent work. Everything turned out to be much stranger than the Duke had imagined, and holding the last two cards in his hands, he stared at them. When everyone had left, he was left alone with his thoughts, and he could not stop looking at the cards he had left after the game. After all, These were those same 2 sevens, and the Duke tried to convince himself that this was just another coincidence. The snow-covered palace, shrouded in a veil of silence, seemed like a crystal castle carved from the ice itself. The Duke stood at the window, his eyes reflecting the raging elements, and his soul a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. Anxiety, melancholy, and some vague hope fought for supremacy, leaving behind only a feeling of hopelessness. An assistant came to him and said that he had studied the solar eclipse, and everyone was saying that no astronomical changes were expected in the near future. As far as surveillance of the Emperor is concerned, no suspicious actions have been noticed on his part so far. The Duke also recently asked for further investigation, and an aide admitted that there had been no developments in the matter. The Emperor offered a payment for consent to this marriage, and probably the return of the old family territory, seized by the Empire, was soon to take place. To be honest, if it weren't for these conditions, Terence would never have agreed to this marriage. But now looking back, he felt that something was wrong. The princess said that this whole thing was a trap set by the Emperor, and claimed that she was able to understand this thanks to her magical power. Until now, I had brushed everything aside and thought that everything was nothing more than a coincidence. But if this eclipse happens as the princess predicted, then everything will happen exactly as she said. Therefore, her burden could not understand how to act correctly, because it seemed that the princess's words turned out to be true. The young men looked out the window while the Duke remained thoughtfully silent, and his assistant noticed something strange. He asked the Duke to pay attention to something that was happening outside the window, right on the street. It was that same solar eclipse, but recently Camion said that it should not happen. The young man swore by the academy, the main temple, and even the observatory, because they confirmed that there would be no solar eclipse. But right before the Duke's eyes, a huge solar ball appeared, and this meant that all the princess's words were true. He asked his assistant to prepare the horses immediately, but the young man could not understand where the Duke was going so suddenly. Terence decided to go to the High Temple to find out the details of everything that was happening, and also to once again make sure that the princess's words were true. On this day, the princess also looked out the window at the incredible solar eclipse and understood that all she could do was wait. Another 35 days had to pass, and the message would arrive soon, and Ivnes was very much looking forward to this event. The maid noticed that the mistress began to sigh heavily too often, but the lady insisted that she was just a little tired. She suggested that the maid go home and rest a little, admitting that she had done enough today. She gave her some delicious aromatic cookies and asked her to take them with her as a token of her gratitude and good work. Touching her hand, the girl felt something strange, and the maid looked intently at her mistress, afraid to say anything. Evans immediately removed her hands and apologized, citing the fact that the maid's hands were too soft and pleasant. The princess thanked the maid for her excellent work, saying goodbye to the girl who came out from behind her room. Since the princess returned from the novel, she has held people's hands several times, but the introduction has only happened once. Everything turned out to be much worse than she thought, and the princess was afraid that at this rate, she would simply be thrown out as unnecessary. But soon the maid knocked on the door of her room again, saying that the high priest had sent the lady an invitation. This was too unexpected news, because after that time the high priest never made himself known again. The lady decided to quickly respond to the invitation, and soon the high priest thanked her for such a quick arrival. He didn't even expect the princess to appear so soon, and also thanked her for the generous donation she left last time. The reason he invited her today was because he wanted to talk about using the proceeds from the sale of the jewelry. The high priest invited the princess to sit down next to him and talk in private, without prying eyes. The princess politely asked the maid to leave the sacred hall for a while to speak with the high priest in person. The man asked the princess to pass, but the next moment Ivnes was surprised by what she saw. By some miracle, His Grace Duke Terence himself appeared before her and greeted his lovely lady. As soon as the Duke appeared before the heroes, the high priest politely asked permission to take his leave. And now the heroine realized that the high priest, who was so afraid of her, could not invite her to his place of his own free will. And since the Grand Duke was seeking a meeting with her, the princess asked if he was ready to believe her. It was difficult, but the Duke had no other choice, because the previous evening he had become convinced that the girl's words were true. He wanted to know if any of the things she said were lies when the terrible tragedy happened. The lady admitted that there was not a drop of falsehood in her words, and she had not lied to the Duke about anything. The young man admitted that he miraculously escaped the disaster, and if something similar had really happened, he would have had no other choice. No one would suspect the emperor, because he certainly could not go so far as to frame him by sacrificing his own. So there was only one option left, that the emperor could resort to cruel methods, and he really was merciless. Terence decided to ask for something, and asked if the girl was willing to help him, then he would help her in return. After listening carefully to the Duke's speech, the princess realized that he was finally ready to trust her. He promised to take care of her safety, so that no one would dare to threaten her, much less kill her. Villainess was incredibly glad that she had managed to win over the young master. Her face lit up with a charming smile, and the lady thanked the young man with all her heart for his help. At that moment, the Duke looked at her carefully and could not understand whether the princess had always been like this. After all, a very kind aura was emanating from her now, and her emotions were truly sincere. Terence stated that they must make sure that their wedding would go off without a single problem. Once they were married, he promised to move the princess to his estate. And from that moment on, even the emperor's influence would be limited, and it sounded like a great plan. The princess was confident that the young man did not need to worry about the wedding. As soon as his safety was guaranteed, she promised to file for divorce. Probably the Duke did not understand at all what was being discussed, and what kind of divorce the princess had just announced. And the very phrase about divorce caused conflicting feelings in him, so he decided to ask her more about this point. As it turned out, the lady was going to file for divorce immediately, preferring to live alone in a quiet place, assuring that the Duke had nothing to worry about, because even after the divorce, she was ready to use her ability to help the Duke. Smiling, Terence admitted that he was very surprised by such an act, because just recently, everything was different. Just a few days ago, the girl was screaming that she was ready to die if they didn't get married, and now she's ready to easily file for divorce. At this moment, the Duke seemed petty and sarcastic, but the princess was not one to be easily taken by surprise. So she admitted that she really regretted what she had done, but that she had now completely gotten rid of her feelings for his lordship. These words sounded even stranger, and the Duke did not understand how she was able to get rid of her feelings. The princess said that she was indeed in love with him, but she had other reasons for wanting this marriage. She thought that this marriage would bring peace between the Duke and the imperial family, but most likely this was nothing more than her personal delusion. So now the princess who tried to mediate between them, but was used and abandoned by her father, will probably have a different place in society. The young man thought it was a great idea. If His Majesty the Emperor had been more reasonable, then the princess's wish would have come true. He asked again if it was true that the lady wanted a divorce when the time came and certain conditions were met. Because the young man had absolutely no idea what plan was in the head of this girl, who until recently had been completely different. He asked if the lady had any more information about the plot at their wedding, which was to take place very soon. Villainess knew that she would die on her wedding day, and her ability could only show a short scene, nothing more. The original said the same thing, that she died at a wedding without any details, so it was impossible to know the exact cause. But it was also written there that the Emperor tried to kill her several times, which means that the murder attempts will happen not only on the wedding day. The heroine managed to remember these details, and she immediately told the Duke that the Emperor had tried to kill her several times before the wedding. Villainess admitted that the death on her wedding day was so shocking that she had forgotten about it completely, although she remembered this information only now and just in time. In fact, the Duke would have liked to help stop it somehow, but he had no idea how to do it, so it was difficult for him to do anything. The only option he could offer was for the girl to keep in his company and just be there for now. Initially, the young man planned to be with the princess after the wedding, but since the danger arose right now, he decided to start protecting her early by suggesting that they stick together so that she could also foresee his future. If the Duke is accused of murder for hating the princess, then it is worth behaving like a true lover to avoid any suspicion. There was definitely a meaning behind this, and it could have been a great chance to avoid killing the princess. But she didn't understand how this could be arranged, since the Duke had absolutely no acting skills, and she was sure that anyone would expose their deception and fake relationship. In the original, the young man also pretended that he had a real relationship with another lady, Sorel, and this was done in order to hide his relationship with Mikhail from the people. This was portrayed as simple awkwardness due to her inexperience, but in reality, it was because the lady had a completely different partner. Now, the Duke, who hated the princess, must suddenly fall in love with her, and this requires first-class acting, as well as unrivaled acting talent. Noticing the strange expression on her face, the young man asked what was wrong, and the princess asked if it was too unexpected to do this and if it would not arouse even more suspicion. The young man noticed that the princess had already apologized to him several times, and he also heard that she treated others well. And seeing the girl from this side, it will not be at all strange that you suddenly felt sympathy for her. People often believe what they see, and even if they have suspicions, they still will not think that the Duke could be lying. After all, given recent events, there is no reason to pretend that he is sincerely in love with the princess. True, even if they start to suspect something, they will wonder what benefit he could get from this situation. Besides, if they pretended to be lovers, the princess would be able to stay at the Duke's estate when something happened and would be able to remain safe. And there was nothing to be done, but there were 35 days left before the wedding, and the princess decided that until then they would have to pretend to be a couple in love. The Duchess's ball was just approaching, and Ivnes suggested going there together, but she needed to get the Empress's permission. She admitted that the Duke should not worry about this, and she had one effective way. Terence agreed to go to the ball with her, and the princess decided to ask him for one more favor. After talking with the young man, she returned to her palace because the most important problems were almost solved. Feeling tired, Ivnes decided to take a hot bath and then have a good rest. And now that the urgent matters were over, the heroine could finally allow herself to relax. The maid reported that the crown prince had recently returned to the capital, and the princess had to know about it. This meant that she had new and exciting events ahead of her that she had to deal with. As soon as the young man returned, he decided to lock himself in the office and did not even visit his sister. As expected, the crown prince hated her too. In the story, his sister was constantly chasing the Duke and then getting into trouble, so it was no surprise that her brother was angry with his sister. Still, she decided that immediately after his arrival, she should meet him face to face. She knocked carefully on the office door and in a quiet voice apologized for disturbing him. The young man sat at his desk holding a pen in his hands, signing some important papers. Seeing her brother, the princess understood why they were so similar, because this young man was a real handsome man. She turned to her brother, confessing that they had not seen each other for a long time, and she was very glad that he had returned safe and sound. The young man immediately asked what his sister had come for, which meant she decided to drop formalities and get straight to the point. If her brother so desired, the princess was ready to accept his conditions and was going to tell the whole truth. She smiled and said that she would like to receive a wedding present, and her words were too unexpected for her brother. Surprised, he even put his pen aside and stopped writing, looking intently at his sister. The girl said that she was going to the Duchess's ball and would like to get permission. The brother was perplexed and asked if his lordship would also be present at the ceremonial event. Ivnes had warned that he would be there too, but she wanted to go there for a completely different reason. Because she allegedly really wanted to meet Lady Diana, whom she had not seen for a very long time. Diana was the only daughter of the House of Rohan, and the princess said that she was not feeling well, but despite this, she agreed to be a bridesmaid. That is why Ivnes would like to express her gratitude to the girl, and for this reason go to the ball. And since the Duchess had personally invited her, she was very afraid that the lady would be disappointed if she did not come. The brother was surprised that the princess received a personal invitation from the Duchess, and probably the Empress herself also had influence here. Even though Villainess studied hard to become the Grand Duchess, the Emperor did not even look in her direction, and the essence of the Empress's behavior was clear. The brother asked if the Empress had really said such words and really had such an opinion. In that case, he suggested that his sister ask the Empress herself for permission and did not understand why she turned to him. But Villainess said that it was unlikely that her brother would give her permission if she told him some information. She said that the Duke despised mistresses, so perhaps their relationship would improve someday. The Empress must have been very upset because her mother had just died and the Empress's place was immediately taken, and besides that, her son was also eyeing the position of Crown Prince. And probably the Crown Prince hates her even more than the heroine herself. The young man asked if his sister was studying to become a duchess in the future and wanted to know what exactly. The princess was studying the history of the empire and the Archduke's family, and her brother asked why the lands of the House of Lens bordered the northern mountains. Villainess said that they are spreading to border areas, and that is the whole point. The brother was surprised because the princess had previously known absolutely nothing about the history of the family, and especially the empire. But the princess knew even such elementary things, because she spent her free time in the library reading books. The brother agreed to tell the Empress that the princess would appear at the ball in his place, since he also had a lot of work to do. This time, the lady managed to convince her brother, and she politely thanked him for his help. Finally, the young man turned to his sister, probably wanting to say something very important. He admitted that if the girl needed anything to prepare for the wedding, she could feel free to contact him at any time. In the original, the young man was not at all worried about his sister, but now he showed a sign of attention, which spoke of his changes. After talking with her brother, she thought for a long time about why he decided to help her, and then she met her maid. She prepared a hot bath for the lady and also brought snow-white clean towels. She also reported that a new maid had arrived and was due to meet the mistress right away. A girl came through the door and greeted the princess, promising to start work from today, and this maid was called Chloe. It was probably the same maid that Duke Terence had sent after the recent conversation. While they were talking on the balcony, the lady was about to leave. The Duke decided to provide a little help. He promised that about the time the lady arrived at the palace, he would send a maid to her. In his opinion, this way he will be able to protect the princess until the wedding day if his man is next to her. The maids were bodyguards all rolled into one, and the princess knew that Chloe could be quite useful in many ways. A few days later, a carriage drawn by snow-white horses was heading towards one of the mansions. Princess Avines rode in it, holding a cute pink box with a white festive bow. She was heading to the ball and was very worried that she might disgrace herself when she danced. But the maid tried to calm the lady down, because the princess had been practicing for several days, and she had performed the waltz perfectly. The maid admitted that even after several days of practice, her dance looked quite impressive. But if it came to other dances, the princess was going to just stay outside the ballroom so as not to worry. And now another fact was more important: how Diana would feel today. Perhaps the princess would be able to protect her, since the presence of a noble lady from the duchy at her wedding would be a kind of guarantee. An elegant snow-white carriage stopped near the palace, and noble ladies were already waiting for its appearance. The Duchess greeted the princess with respect, and Villainess thanked the lady for the pleasant invitation. A noble daughter of the Duchy of Rohan named Diana came out to the guest, and she was supposed to become the princess's best friend. It was their first meeting, and Villainess smiled sweetly as she greeted the venerable lady. She presented the gift to Diana, confessing that the girl had agreed to be a bridesmaid at her wedding and was worried that she had not been able to thank her sooner. Diana admitted that she wanted to show the princess the dress she was going to wear to the wedding and happily offered to let her look at it. The Duchess suggested that her daughter give her guest a tour of the palace, and Diana happily agreed. They entered a luxurious palace where there was a tea room and right behind it a beautiful greenhouse. The princess looked closely at the servants, and especially the maids, because she knew perfectly well that one of them was supposed to add poison to Diana's medicine. She greeted each maid warmly, trying to find the servant from her vision. In such a huge mansion, there must be dozens of maids, and the princess had no idea how she would be able to find her. She even thought that she should ask Diana to bring a personal maid, but her request would seem too strange. Suddenly, the girls walked into the music room, and even the princess had never seen anything like it before. In the music room stood a huge white grand piano, its lacquered surface perfectly smooth and cold in appearance, reflecting the light from the high windows, scattering it around the room in soft, muted reflections. The keys, in ivory and ebony, beckoned with their impeccable symmetry, promising enchanting melodies and exciting harmonies. Diana revealed that in fact, His Highness the Crown Prince had been here in the past. And so long ago he had a meeting with Father Diana, and he went into the music room for a minute when he heard pleasant sounds and melodies coming from the room. They quickly exchanged greetings, and after that, the young man left. But Diana admitted that she still cannot forget that day. And now the princess finally realized that Diana really did have feelings for the crown prince. But the young man, even when he heard her name, did not show any reaction at all, as if he did not know her at all. For Diana, this meeting left a pleasant impression, and she still could not forget this young man. It would seem that there was nothing remarkable about the crown prince, and Diana probably simply fell in love with him because there were no other men around. She asked the princess if she thought the prince remembered this meeting, and Villainess lied that her brother definitely remembered her. She couldn't let anything slip, because if she told Diana the whole truth, it would only hurt the young girl's feelings. Finally, the ladies reached Diana's room, and it was right next to the music room. The princess noticed that since her room was nearby, she could keep an eye out to see if anyone would sneak into her room. She asked what time the girl usually took her medicine, but she was surprised. I don't understand why the princess decided to ask about this. Diana admitted that she was just worried, and the girl was supposed to take her medication around the time the ball ended. The princess admitted that she did not want to cause anyone any trouble, and Diana looked at the gift with interest. The lady was incredibly eager to attend the ball, but she felt a little disappointed. Because the girl could not attend due to her illness, since most of the evening dresses exposed skin, she was embarrassed about how others would look at her. The princess probably shouldn't have brought this up, and she decided that she needed to change the subject as quickly as possible. She asked where the bridesmaid's dress was, suggesting that they look at it right now. She decided to look into the room to make sure of her findings, and it really was that very room. The bridesmaid's dress was already prepared, and the princess was delighted as soon as she saw the luxurious garment. But for some reason, the dress seemed too simple to her, because it had absolutely no lace or decorations. Surely the Duchess advised the girl to wear such a dress, because Diana should not stand out at the wedding ceremony. Still, she felt that this outfit was too modest, and she should definitely change the situation. She told Diana that it would be nice to add some embellishments and lace, and the lady wondered if she could really do that. The princess asked not to worry, and suggested that the girl choose what she really wanted to wear and add some decorations. She also wanted Diana to open her gift right now, because there was something special inside. In the cute box was a beautiful necklace, which the princess chose because of its beautiful color and knew that it would definitely match her dress. Diana was delighted to see the valuable gift and thanked the future bride with joyful eyes. The lady desperately wanted to go to the ball, but could not afford it because of her skin condition. And seeing Diana like this, the princess realized that she could not allow this, and Diana must definitely go out into the world and not be afraid anymore. She suggested going downstairs and wanted to spend a little more time with this girl. They went into the living room, and Diana said that there were also many interesting things here that she would like to show. As soon as the ladies came down, the princess saw that there were some other people standing in the corridor, and she happened to see someone at the Empress's tea party. These people were probably relatives of the Duchess. Villainess tried to understand what kind of guests were standing downstairs, because she realized that Diana did not want to go out to them. The lady asked if the princess had seen the ballroom, which the Duchess had painstakingly prepared. But the ladies whispered that no matter how hard the Duchess worked, her daughter would still not be able to attend the family ball. These people pretended to be worried, subtly mocking, and now the princess understood why Diana looked so sad. It was too unfair, and she knew she couldn't leave everything to chance, since the first guests had already arrived. And only the princess could somehow improve Diana's situation so that this girl would not be sad. The princess approached the ladies, whom she had not seen since the day of the Empress's tea party. But she did not recognize the girl at all, who greeted her warmly and assured her that they had already met before. Since the heroine had only read the novel up to the 3rd chapter, she reported that she could not remember the noble lady. That's why she wasn't embarrassed to say that she didn't know her at all and was seeing her for the first time. The Heraldic Register was a book that contained the genealogy of all the families and nobility on the continent. In other words, in her eyes, all these people looked the same, and if they were going to do something insignificant, they should be prepared to get double for it. The young man said that they were relatives of the Rohan family, quite respected people. The princess said that given that the guests were criticizing their host in the corridor, she assumed that they were of low class and unfamiliar with etiquette. People were confused, because they certainly didn't expect some girl to come out to them and start lecturing them. The princess asked them to be more careful in their statements next time, and said that she was planning to relax there, offering to join them. The guests politely informed the comma that they would be waiting downstairs, since they did not want to get involved with the straightforward lady at all. They remained downstairs waiting for the Duchess, while the girls decided to go and do their own thing. The princess suggested that Lady Diana was probably tired and needed to rest a little. Diana happily agreed, and Ivness asked her to keep everything that had just happened a secret from her mother. She knew that Diana would under no circumstances tell anything, and only thanked the princess for her behavior. She had managed to put these fools in their place, and now the princess had to take care of her own affairs. The people sent to the south have already returned, and signs of rebellion have appeared in the southern region. After investigation, it turned out that although there had been disturbances nearby, there was no danger at all. After the trip, the Duke realized that it seemed that these reports were greatly exaggerated, and that it was definitely the Emperor's doing. The assistant did not understand why His Majesty would go so far, because he was not trying to send his lordship to the south. The Duke suggested that if the princess were killed now, there would definitely be someone who would be suspected first. And his assistant was surprised because he realized that the Duke was talking about himself, afraid that something similar could happen to the commander. His question came out of the blue, and the aide asked why the Duke had chosen to ask that particular question. But what was important now was that there had been no news from the princess yet, and the assistant also had no information. 5 days have passed since their last meeting at the temple, and they still have not met. The Duke was still trying to understand why the princess said that she had fallen out of love with him and whether her feelings had really faded. It was not that he did not think about divorce, and the Duke could not understand what he felt towards this girl. But for some reason, these words hurt his feelings, and Terence could not figure out at all why this happened. The assistant asked why the Duke had decided to take so many knights with him, since they were only going to a ball. There were indeed many knights standing near the carriage, who this time accompanied not only the Duke. In fact, the princess asked him to continue, and he ordered the knights to be present to keep the lady safe. After all, something unexpected could happen at this ball, which the princess warned the Duke about. While in the palace, Ivness asked the maid for a favor, which surprised her greatly. The maid did not understand why the princess wanted her to take the key to the music room from the Duchess while they were in the ballroom. She asked to use the key to unlock the door, and warned that the maid would be waiting for her inside. The princess's mood was too serious, and the maid could not help but fulfill her request. After listening to the mistress's order, the maid agreed to do everything she asked her to do. This moment was incredibly important, and the princess decided to go through the planned procedure again. As soon as the 3rd dance is over, she must run out of the ballroom and head straight to the music room. Then she will be able to follow the maid who will enter Diana's room and slip poison. At this point, the princess will burst into the room and scream for the maid to stop immediately. catching her red-handed. This plan was just perfect in her head, but at that moment the maid approached the princess and asked for her attention. She said that the reception room had already been prepared and that the princess needed to go there. But Villainess didn't understand what room they were talking about and why she had to be there right now. In the room, noble ladies were already waiting for her, who wanted to personally greet the respected princess. Come to think of it, there was a tradition for guests to spend time in the reception hall while waiting for the ball to begin. The ladies apologized as they did not know that the princess would also be present at our ball, although they should have greeted her properly. The lady admitted that everything was fine and she had not planned to come either, but someone insisted and she had no choice. As soon as the ladies heard that the Archduke himself had insisted on this decision, they immediately began to whisper. The heroine was sure that the ladies would think that she had really gone crazy, and they were left to see everything for themselves and draw their own conclusions. Because the venerable Duke was already getting out of the black carriage and approaching the palace, the Duchess was already waiting for the Duke, and she was very happy as soon as she saw him. She admitted that she did not know whether the Duke knew that the princess had also come to the gala event. The young man asked her not to worry, because everything would be fine, and he was responsible for the princess. The Duchess was incredibly happy to hear this, and trusted the young man in any decision he made. It seemed that the third dance was about to begin, and the Duchess suggested that they hurry off to a luxurious ball. The knights responsible for his safety crowded around the Duke, and he himself decided to head there as quickly as possible. As soon as the young man entered the palace, an acquaintance immediately approached him and greeted him with joy. He heard that the Duke was about to leave on a business trip and decided to find out how his preparations were progressing. His Majesty the Emperor had been away for a long time, and all these people deliberately avoided the topic of marriage. And surely all the rumors were due to his presence and behavior towards the princess. As the Duke appeared on the floor, he knew that the next dance was about to begin, but the princess was nowhere to be seen. The hall, full of glitter and bustle, with thousands of flickering lights and the rustle of silk dresses, suddenly narrowed to a single point, hers. There was not a drop of falsehood or a shadow of arrogance in her appearance, only quiet grace and some inexplicable sadness visible through the mask of a secular smile. He watched her from afar, enchanted, afraid to disturb the fragile charm of the moment. The Duke carefully approached the princess and asked if anything strange had happened to her, and he very much hoped that she was doing well. The princess was doing just fine and thanked the gentleman for such valuable attention. For a moment, time seemed to stop. In her eyes, he saw the reflection of his own soul, lonely, searching, thirsting for love and understanding. Duke Terrence's heart began to beat faster, and he realized that he could no longer remain on the sidelines. He knelt down on one knee in front of the girl and asked her to do him the honor of dancing a beautiful waltz with him. At that moment, the first chords of the waltz sounded. The melody, gentle and exciting, filled the hall, dissolving the last doubts. He gallantly extended his hand to her, and her fingers, thin and cool, touched his. And in that fleeting touch, he felt an electric shock run through his whole body. The hall, which had previously seemed noisy and crowded, seemed to recede into the background, leaving only the two of them circling in the rhythm of a waltz in their own little world. The music of the waltz flowed like a river, carrying them into a world of dreams and fantasies, and Duke Terrence felt himself losing his head, plunging into the abyss of her blue eyes. Her gaze, full of sadness and hope, was directed at him. He felt her breathing, light and intermittent. He sensed the scent of her perfume, subtle and bewitching. But it seemed to him that the princess had lost weight after their meeting, and perhaps it was all due to emotional stress. She had once mentioned that she loved to dance, but now it seemed to the Duke that the girl did not like it at all. And he noticed that she looked incredibly sad, as if her soul was tormented by terrible doubts. Looking into her eyes, for some reason he couldn't stop thinking about it, as if he truly sympathized with her now. The Duke tried to convince himself that he was simply afraid that this could affect her abilities, and that this was supposedly the only reason. Without realizing it, he squeezed the princess's hand tighter, and she admitted that the young man had probably put in a lot of effort. But she was confident that their plan was progressing successfully, and the Duke also supported her opinion. The princess was glad that everything was going this way, and after the Duke's words, the lady felt a slight relief. The music continued to play, and they danced, forgetting about everything in the world, just the two of them, in the whirlwind of the waltz, under the watchful gaze of the moon penetrating through the high windows. Looking into the Duke's eyes, the girl suddenly caught her breath, and the only problem with the young man was that he was too handsome. The dance went off just fine, and the heroine was glad that she never stepped on the young man's foot and disgraced herself. But she managed to notice that for some reason, all the guests were looking intently in one direction. Not understanding what was happening here, the heroine also turned around and, to her great surprise, saw a familiar person. Her brother, who definitely shouldn't be there, appeared at the ceremony in person. The crown prince showed up unexpectedly at the ball, but he recently told his sister that he was too busy with his work. The Duchess was also surprised by his appearance because his sister was present at the ball instead of him. She thought that the young man would not arrive, so she could not greet him properly, but the gentleman assured her that it was his fault and that he arrived too late. He admitted that sending only his sister to a ball to which he had been personally invited would be indecent, but he decided to come anyway. The Duke greeted the princess's brother, and everyone respected this noble man. The young man admitted that he had seen a superb dance and that it was a very pleasant sight, but Villainess knew that he could say one thing, but his face betrayed his emotions. At that moment, she felt a light touch on her shoulder, probably the hand of the Duke with whom she had just danced. The young man confessed that he and the princess were engaged, and their dance was quite natural since the wedding was about to take place. After the gentleman's words, the crown prince looked closely at the couple and only remained silent in response. The princess couldn't understand what was wrong with this guy because the novel said that he was a terrible player. But for some reason now, the Duke behaved indecently naturally. And for a second, the girl even believed in the sincerity of his feelings and words. Standing before the crown prince, the Duke politely asked to take the princess away for a while, asking permission. He admitted that he would like to discuss the upcoming wedding and show her his estate, and now was the best time to do so. Since her fiancé politely asked someone for a favor, then of course the crown prince had to give permission, but the princess noticed that her brother was clearly nervous. And the Duchess confessed that seeing how close the princess and the Duke were to each other, she was sincerely happy about their wonderful union. The Duke, of course, took the girl's hand and admitted that he had previously been too rude to the princess, but was now ready to change everything completely. Kissing her hand, he declared that he had misunderstood someone so wonderful and kind, and that he was incredibly ashamed of his rude behavior. Even the princess did not expect such a convincing performance, and looking at Terence, she really believed his words now. The lady could not hide her embarrassment as soon as the Duke touched her tender hand with his lips. He noticed that the girl's face was sweating heavily, but she admitted that she simply hadn't danced for a long time and needed a short break to recover. Wishing her brother a pleasant time, Villainess left with the Duke, warning the crown prince of her departure. The young man stood in amazement and only meekly wished his sister a pleasant walk. The Duke and the lady went outside to get some fresh air, and the young man was sure that today's conversations and dancing would be enough to convince those around them of their false love. The princess was also sure that she and the Duke had definitely made an indelible impression on high society. But after the heroes went out onto the balcony, Villainess immediately noticed that the Duke's mood had changed very dramatically. She didn't understand that a person could change so dramatically in an instant. For her, it was truly amazing. After all, the Duke showed incredible acting today in front of her brother and other guests, which even the princess herself was very surprised by. Noticing the girl's intense gaze, Terence asked why she was looking at him so strangely. The heroine asked if the Duke had enough knights with him, and probably the Duke's house now had very few forces left due to the numerous problems in the empire. That is why, when she saw the Duke for the last time, she asked for one of her knights to be brought here, and of course, she told him about her visions. Terence asked if the girl had managed to find out the identity of that servant, But unfortunately, the princess still had not seen the girl from the vision, although she had already tried to find her. The maid could probably be hiding and waiting for the right moment to act, and the heroes understood that anything could happen. The Duke suggested waiting for the moment when the maid put something in Lady Diana's water and stopping her, and Innes completely agreed, because this was the only way to get the whole truth out of her. Lady Diana said she took her medication at 10 o'clock at night, so they decided to wait for the right time right in the palace to finally catch the maid red-handed. Suddenly, Terence came closer to the girl and asked excitedly if the crown prince, her brother, knew that she was in great danger. The Duke managed to frighten the lady a little, but she admitted that her brother was not aware of her affairs and could not understand why the Duke decided to ask about it. Simple curiosity prompted the young man to ask this question, and he wanted to know why the princess turned to him for help when her brother was the crown prince. But the heroine could not tell that in the original story it was the Duke who would win, and asked if he really believed her brother, and was he really sure that he could protect her from His Majesty the Emperor. Everyone understood perfectly well that the crown prince would not be able to do this, because right now the princess's brother did not have the strength to resist the emperor himself. Besides, the princess wasn't even sure if she wanted her brother to protect her, because in the original, it was written that the young man didn't mourn the death of his sister, and there was even a scene in which people whispered that he seemed to even like it. Now that Ivnes thought about it, she realized that even in this life, she had been unlucky with her relatives and family. Her real family in another world died when the girl was still very young. It all ended with the heroine running around among relatives before she was finally sent to an orphanage. So the princess couldn't even imagine what it was like to have a happy family, and suddenly felt a strange cold and trembling all over her body. The Duke carefully approached the girl and threw his coat over her, because he saw that for some reason she had become very cold. The young man noticed that the lady's outfit was too light for such cool weather, so she needed to dress warmer. Feeling pleasantly cared for, the princess thanked Terence for the special attention he had shown her. After the gesture of concern, the young man said only one word, and that word was his name, Terence. At first, the lady did not understand what he meant, but the young man only asked to be called by his name and not by his title of Duke. The princess almost misunderstood him, and it would be strange if the groom behaved like that, because their wedding was about to take place. That is why the Duke put aside all formalities, asking the princess to call him simply by his first name. Duke Terence looked as cold as a winter dawn over snow-capped mountains, his face now like a mask carved from granite, and the look in his eyes, like shards of ice, expressed neither warmth nor sympathy. Looking at the young man, the princess could not understand what had happened to his face, because he himself asked to be called by his name, and the Duke was an incredibly complex person who was simply impossible to understand. Suddenly, strange footsteps were heard outside, and the heroes looked at each other, waiting to see who it could be. In the silence that permeated the ancient halls of the palace, every sound echoed loudly, and even the quietest steps seemed deafening. Terence, without answering, put his finger to his lips, calling for silence. He slowly opened the door, allowing them to see a narrow strip of the corridor, while the footsteps approached, becoming louder and clearer. They saw one of the maids walk straight into Diana's room, probably bringing the medicine she needed. At that moment, the princess felt that the right time had come. It was this maid who was now carrying poison for the girl. So the princess immediately ran into the room and shouted loudly that Diana should under no circumstances drink what the maid gave her. Diana was completely perplexed, because as usual at this time she was taking her medicine. But now she saw that the princess and the Duke ran into her room, and this was very strange and suspicious. Diana didn't understand what was going on here, and why the princess and Terence had just run into her bedroom screaming loudly. The princess could not tell the girl the whole truth, but her gaze was extremely wary as she stared intently at the maid. Ivnes stated that the maid had stirred something into her glass, and she was absolutely certain of it. The maid said that this was a monstrous accusation and that she would never have done such a thing to her mistress after hearing the princess's speech. Ivness assumed that the maid was trying to pretend to be stupid, but she knew that she would fail and that Ivness knew the whole truth. At that moment, a group of knights entered the room, whom the Duke had called and asked to come at a certain time. The princess immediately asked the knights to check the maid's sleeves, claiming that she had seen her hide the vial in the sleeve of her robe. The knights did not know whom to listen to, since their commander was the Duke, but now the princess was clearly giving them an order. Therefore, the young man, looking at the knights, ordered them to do what they had just been told. They immediately grabbed the maid by the arms so that she would not have a chance to hide or throw the bottle away somewhere. One of the knights touched the sleeve of her robe, and indeed, under the white cuffs was a strange crystal bottle with unknown contents. The knight showed everyone present that he had just pulled a bottle of some liquid from the maid's sleeve. The Duke picked up the mysterious bottle, took out the lid, and wanted to understand what was inside. The Duke brought the crystal bottle to his nose and carefully inhaled its aroma to see if it really did contain poison. And as soon as he smelled it, he immediately realized that he was inside the crystal bottle. He ordered his aunt to be brought here immediately and told that Diana had just been attacked by a maid. The princess asked what medicine was inside the bottle, noticing that the Duke looked scared at that moment. Judging by the expression on Terrence's face, he knew perfectly well what was inside that bottle. He stated with confidence that it would contain an antipyretic, which he easily identified by its smell. The princess could not believe that the bottle actually contained an antipyretic because she was sure that the maid was going to add poison. Unfortunately, it was a common medicine, but for Diana it was truly poison because the girl was sensitive to herbs, so even a small amount could worsen her condition. The princess was not mistaken, because it was with this very means that someone tried to aggravate her illness, and since it was kind Diana, no one would suspect anything. No one understood who was planning something terrible against this girl, but everyone understood that she was in danger. The mother immediately went into her bedroom to check if everything was okay with her daughter. She asked the Duke what had happened here, because people were insisting that her daughter had just been attacked. Having presented the Duchess with evidence and a crystal bottle, the young man said that he had just found it in the hands of a maid, and that she had mixed an antipyretic into Diana's medicine. The Duchess was outraged, because this medicine was forbidden to be used on the estate, especially since everyone knew that her daughter could become ill. The lady asked who ordered the maid to do this, because she definitely couldn't have done it all on her own, and someone was definitely behind it. The maid was incredibly frightened and she was trembling, so she couldn't even answer the Duchess, and only stuttered, trying to say something unintelligible. Falling to her knees before her mistress, the maid begged for her mistake and confessed that Baron Mossel would kill her if she did not fulfill his demands. The heroine was completely unfamiliar with this name, and she asked the Duchess who this Baron was. He turned out to be a relative of Diana and the Rohan family, a man they had seen just the night before. It was the same young man the princess had seen in the living room yesterday, but she could not understand why this particular man was behind the attack. The Duchess realized that it was all about the title, because if Diana died, he would be the one to inherit the duchy. He heard that the girl's health had improved recently, so he decided to make the situation worse in this way. The Duchess ordered the maid to be locked in the basement, and the Baron to be quietly detained in the prayer room so that he could not escape. The maid begged her mistress for mercy, assuring her that she was completely innocent, and that it was the Baron's order. The Duchess was incredibly happy that thanks to the Duke and Princess, they were able to avoid tragedy, and thanked Terrence and Evanes from the bottom of her heart. The Duke's words might have sounded rude, but he decided to ask if anyone was checking the food Diana was eating. Nothing like this had ever happened before, and Diana's food had only been tested for poison. The Duchess felt she had made a mistake. No one blamed the Duchess, and the Duke informed the princess that he was forced to step away for a while. He gave the Duchess a precious Arcadia crystal, a rare mineral found in the Martel mines in the far north. It is much more sensitive than the magical stones used to detect poison, so the crystal should detect most drugs. The Duke, in gratitude for the invitation to the ball, presented the Duchess with a crystal so that they could easily detect any poison. Diana looked incredibly upset, and she was very worried that everything happened on a day when the heroes were supposed to be happy. But an unpleasant situation happened. The Duchess tried to calm her daughter, assuring her that it was not her fault and that she should not cry or worry under any circumstances. Now the princess was most afraid that there was no way to cure Diana's illness completely, and this illness would haunt the girl for the rest of her life. The original medical history did not describe her in detail, nor did it say whether she ever got better or how long she lived. Perhaps the heroine will be able to use her ability and see Diana's future, which is connected with her illness. She approached the lady and asked her not to cry, because it really wasn't her fault at all. She put her hand on the girl's shoulder. The princess wanted to see her future, but she saw absolutely nothing, as if her magical power had stopped working. But the next second, the princess experienced something strange, and while she held her hand on the girl's shoulder, her head began to spin. Everything seemed to swim and darken in the heroine's eyes, and she was afraid that she might faint right now. However, after some time, her gift worked, and she managed to see something that could happen in the future. Finally, the foresight worked, and in her vision, she saw the Duchess in a black robe talking with another man. She saw that the woman was crying very bitterly, and her face expressed great longing and deep sorrow. The Duchess said she couldn't believe something so unfair had happened, because they had finally found a cure for her daughter. The princess thought that they had managed to find a cure and cure Diana, but for some reason the Duchess looked incredibly sad. There was a gloomy atmosphere between the two people, and for some reason the lady did not stop shedding bitter tears. The young man who sat opposite the Duchess asked the lady not to blame herself in any way for what had happened. After all, no one could have thought that the young lady would die so suddenly, and this was exactly the terrible event that the princess managed to see. Finally, Villainess realized that the Duchess was dressed in black for a reason, and that her daughter would probably die in the future. Judging by the conversation between the Duchess and the young man, she managed to find out that despite the medicine found, the girl still faces a tragic fate. In her vision, she learned that in the future, Diana would die, but she did not understand what was happening here at all. But the Duchess had just said that there was a cure, but it didn't help, and the princess wanted to understand what it was, because it might not be possible to change the heroine's fate. She just wanted the Duchess to stop crying and tell her what kind of medicine it was so she could get more details. At that moment, the princess noticed the Duchess's black dress. If you think about it, she had never worn anything like it before. This dress looked much lighter than the one she was wearing now, and the princess tried to figure out when this might happen. This meant that the time of the season in the prophecy was definitely sunny summer, because the Duchess was wearing a light robe. There was catastrophically little information, and the princess did not even know when it would be, in a year or perhaps in 2. She needed more details about the medicine to be able to prevent a terrible event. The vision began to slowly blur in the princess's mind, and she realized that now it could all end, and she would no longer be able to obtain information. The next second, the heroine found herself back in Diana's room, and that was all she managed to learn from the vision of the future. She found herself back in reality, where a living Diana was sitting on the bed and looking in surprise at the princess, who seemed to have suddenly passed out. Even though Villainess had probably just looked suspicious, she realized that she needed to act as naturally as possible so that Diana wouldn't suspect anything. She was still holding the girl by the shoulder and admitted that her heart just ached, and she really wanted everything to be okay with Diana. And the heroine realized that she definitely wouldn't be able to stand aside and just watch Diana die in the future. The vision did indeed indicate that a cure for her illness existed, but the princess never found out what it was. So she decided to invite the girl, if she didn't mind, to visit her palace sometime. Diana was upset because she had not yet made her debut in social circles and had never appeared in public. The princess tried to understand that it would be difficult, but in her opinion, everything was possible. And since Diana was going to help with the wedding preparations, no one would ask unnecessary questions. The princess said that she hadn't even sewn a dress for herself yet and offered to help the girl choose a suitable design. In fact, the princess wanted to protect the lady from tragedy by any means possible and asked Diana's opinion on this matter. This way she would be able to see Diana. The more often she saw her, the more chances the princess would have to see another prediction. She certainly didn't want Diana to die like this, and decided to use everything she had to find a suitable cure as soon as possible. The lady was incredibly happy when she heard the princess's proposal, and she promised to look forward to her imminent visit. It was already quite late, and Villainess decided that it was time for her to go, wishing Diana a good rest. As the princess left the girl's bedroom, she sighed and realized that it had been quite a difficult night. The Duke said that it was only thanks to the girl that he was able to save his cousin, and he was sincerely grateful to her. The princess did what any member of the royal family was expected to do, and she was surprised by Terrence's sudden gratitude. To be honest, the young man was impressed, because the princess's abilities turned out to be more useful than he could have imagined, and seeing not only his own future, but also the future of other people was simply wonderful. Evans knew that the young man would never praise her without a catch, but his words were sincere. Just at that moment, the Duchess came out and thanked the princess with special respect for everything she had done for her that day, and the Duchess could not even imagine how else she could express her gratitude. She admitted that all this time she had been misjudging the princess, about whom there were too many terrible rumors. Villainess understood that many people were wary of the princess, because she had indeed posed a threat to many people before. The Duke said that he wanted to keep his involvement in this matter a secret, so that no one would know the details of what happened. After all, if it became known that the princess and he were involved in such a scandal, it could put the duchy in a difficult position. Having listened to the young man's opinion, the Duchess understood his position perfectly well, promising to keep everything a strict secret. She bowed and said that she would come later to properly express her gratitude to the Duke and princess. The Duke decided to stay in the palace to take care of business and suggested that the princess go to the palace first. The young man promised that they would definitely meet soon, and he needed to resolve some very important matters. It wasn't like the princess had a choice, but she knew she would have to continue meeting with the Duke whether she wanted to or not. The carriage pulled up behind the princess, its gilded wheels reflecting the rays of the setting sun and sparkling through the foliage of the centuries-old trees surrounding the castle. Just as Villainess was about to enter the carriage, her brother suddenly approached her and asked if she was really going to return to the palace. Since it was already very late, Villainess was really planning to go home after such a strange night. He offered to go together if the girl didn't mind, although the brother had never looked for a moment to be with his sister before. Looking at her brother, the heroine even assumed that she had probably already gone crazy because his behavior was very unusual. She understood that the young man probably wanted to ask her about the Duke, and she definitely didn't want to sit locked in a carriage with this guy and his love interest right now. So she thought about how to refuse her brother a joint trip so that she could finally be alone with her thoughts. At that moment, an assistant approached the young man and said that the Duchess wanted to talk to him right now. The brother had to carry out the Duchess's order and promised that he would come to her soon. The Duchess must have wanted to talk about the Baron's punishment, and the princess was glad that her brother did not go with her. In this country, in order to punish a nobleman, it was necessary to obtain permission from the emperor, and in the absence of the emperor, her brother was the only one who could give an agreement. And this meant that Villainess could now calmly return home. Most of all, she just wanted to wash up and lie down in a soft, cozy bed. The sun illuminates the palace, and its golden rays, like invisible brushes, paint the walls with thousands of shades of the morning dawn. The princess slept very soundly all that night, and early in the morning the maids arrived to greet their mistress. One of them carefully dressed the girl in a robe so that the princess would not freeze under any circumstances, and the other offered to fill a hot bath. The maids seemed much more polite than before, and it made sense now that the princess was no longer a threat. Villainess noticed one of the maids because her behavior seemed a little strange to her. She even assumed that the girl was nervous for some reason and decided to ask if her guess was true. Now the maids were not at all afraid to talk to Villainess, and one of them even decided to inquire about some event. The maid asked if it was true that the princess had met with His Grace, the Grand Duke himself, the previous evening. The princess laughed and understood what was the matter, and since she had no reason to hide the whole truth, she confessed that she had indeed seen the Duke. But rumors had already begun to circulate that the Duke had confessed his love for the princess, and the maids wanted to find out all the details as soon as possible. As soon as Villainess heard about the words about love, she laughed even more because it was absolutely not true. The maids heard that the Duke fell on his knees and asked forgiveness for his rudeness, confessing his love to the girl right in front of the high society. There were probably already strange rumors going around, and the princess knew that all the gossip was so exaggerated. So she explained to the maids that this definitely did not happen, at which point Her Majesty the Empress asked for a visit. As soon as the maid reported this, the princess became a little tense, because the Empress herself wanted to talk to her right now. She went to the Empress's room and, asking forgiveness for her appearance, wanted to find out what this lady needed. The Empress was drinking tea from an expensive porcelain mug, and she called Villainess to see if she had enjoyed the ball the previous day. Villainess admitted to her mother that the ball was simply wonderful, and the event went smoothly. But suddenly, the Empress reported that she had heard news about what had happened at the ceremonial event. The Empress asked if it was true that the princess had begged the Duke to be her cavalier. At the ball, she was outraged by her daughter's behavior. Villainess knew that she had definitely not begged or asked anyone, and decided to find out who had brought such strange information. Last night, it was the Duke who asked her to dance, and everyone present saw it. But completely different rumors reached the Empress. She wanted to know the whole truth about her daughter. The princess understood that her mother probably wanted to confirm the truth through her, and asked why the lady was so surprised, since it was quite natural to dance with her future groom. She had no intention of playing along with the Empress, who already knew that her daughter had encountered the Duke in the temple last time and was probably planning to win his heart. Villainess said that last time she simply handed the bouquet to the Duke, who accepted the flowers from her. Her mother had a completely different vision. She was sure that the young man accepted them only because she mentioned his mother's name and he just wanted to be polite. The Empress tried her best to understand why the Duke was so kind to her daughter, but she continued to criticize her, probably wanting to say something specific. Perhaps her mother suspected her of something, and the princess tried to be careful in her conversation. The lady asked her daughter what she thought about refraining from leaving the palace and no longer appearing in high society. The Empress heard that the prince offered to accompany her to the estate yesterday. Let us remember that the girl's probationary period is not over yet. Who knows how much more trouble she is going to cause the Duke if she goes to his estate. This was exactly what Mother had been leading up to throughout the entire conversation, and now Villainess finally understood her hidden motives. She was afraid that the Emperor would be angry with her for not keeping her daughter locked up in the palace, and the princess saw right through her mother. But she had no intention of backing down, and admitted that the Duke had personally invited her, and her brother had already given his permission. The princess had already gone out 3 times, and her mother was sure that this was more than enough, since besides, it was not proper for a future daughter-in-law to wander around outside so often. She suggested that her daughter leave her fate and other affairs to someone else, being sure that the Duke would prefer that she remain living in the palace. The Empress tried to persuade her to stay instead of challenging the Crown Prince's decision. But Villainess had already come up with answers in case the Empress attacked her like that, saying that since Mother mentioned it, she was probably right. The princess smiled and said that in that case, she would like to live in a monastery, which her mother never expected from her daughter. Looking at her daughter in surprise, she could not believe her ears that her daughter really wanted to live in a monastery. As the lady had already said, her daughter was on probation, and she was sure that it would please Her Majesty if she prayed until the wedding itself, and the Duke would certainly be pleased with the pious bride. Villainess's great-aunt and both former princesses also lived in a monastery before their marriage, so Villainess suggested this option. But the Empress thought that her daughter was behaving too strangely, suggesting that she pray until the wedding. Of course she was worried, because her great-aunt was locked in a monastery because her mother was executed as a criminal. It is said that the princesses who lived in the monastery purified their bodies, but in truth, it was just a way to keep the royal daughters who were in a difficult situation until they got married. The empress asked if her daughter could imagine life in a monastery with simple food, and all she would do was pray every day. Ivans asked if it wouldn't be great to live a quiet and modest life before marriage. After all, if people hear that she left, following her mother's advice, I wonder what they will think and what rumors will spread. Now the empress was not in the most advantageous position, and she understood that she could not influence her daughter and her decision in any way. Probably no one would like it if a girl went to a monastery, because it would be too loud a gesture, as if the family had decided to lock her away somewhere far away. The empress suggested thinking about this issue again, and she certainly did not want to agree with her daughter's position. Trying to be nice, Ivnes asked her mother for permission regarding the upcoming meeting with the duke. The lady understood that her daughter was behaving this way for a reason, and her gloomy look said a lot. She angrily stated that her daughter was trying to blackmail her by putting forward her own conditions and not agreeing with her opinion. Finally, the empress understood after so much time that if she refused her daughter now, she would still insist that you go to a monastery. But the empress could not allow this. So at this point, the princess was sure that her mother had only one option left. She declared that she had no idea about any blackmail. The empress rose abruptly from her chair and expressed indignation that her daughter was behaving too impudently and rudely. But at that moment, there was a knock on the living room door, which meant that the angry conversation would finally be over. The maid turned to the empress and informed her that a wedding gift had arrived for Her Highness from the duchy. Probably the duke sent something before the wedding, and the empress was surprised because there was still a lot of time left before the wedding. For some reason, he decided to send a wedding gift so early, and the princess did not understand because they had parted only 12 hours ago. It was timely, and the threats could now definitely work, so Ivnes happily asked if the duke really had sent a gift. Now she asked the empress if she could see her fiancé, because this was an excellent opportunity. There was a menacing grin on the lady's face, because she understood that there was absolutely nothing more she could do in this situation. And since the duke himself asked for her presence, she was forced to let her daughter go without any complaints. The princess felt her influence and victory, and smiling, she thanked her mother for her understanding. The empress will probably report this to the emperor soon, and the princess, with a sense of duty fulfilled, decided to take her leave. She was sure that nothing serious would happen in the next 24 hours, and at least now she could breathe a sigh of relief and have a good time for the whole week. The princess left the palace to receive a wedding gift, but at that moment one of the maids approached her. The lady was agitated about something and asked the mistress to follow her right away. Taking her hand, the girl led the princess to the second floor. While Ivnes did not understand at all what could have happened and why there was such urgency, they went to the window and the maid asked the mistress to look, because something strange was happening outside the window. The lady obeyed the maid and went to the window to finally find out what was going on here. At first, the lady could not understand what had happened, but as soon as she looked carefully out the window, she was very surprised. And for some reason, the garden near the fountain, where other flowers had recently grown, was filled with bushes with red petals and bright flowers. She looked closely at the plants and could not understand, because just yesterday there was nothing near the fountain. As it turned out, these were all gifts from the duke's estate, and they say that it took a carriage of snow to bring them. In Albion, it was a tradition to present a bouquet and jewelry as wedding gifts, but now the princess saw something incredible before her. It was simply beyond all traditions. The fountain was surrounded by fragrant flowers, and Ivnes was even afraid to guess how much it all might cost. The maid told her that these flowers were called rastan, but the princess knew absolutely nothing about this plant. Huge flowers with red leaves symbolized boundless love and great respect. Probably, this flower existed exclusively in this world, and admiring its beauty, the princess could not tear herself away from the window. The maid was worried about where they would store all the bouquets, because if they left everything outside, they would quickly freeze. The princess suggested decorating the entire palace with the name, making a fragrant mixture from the rest, and also using the flower petals to brew aromatic tea. It was just a great idea, and the ladies quickly decided what to do with the huge amount of flowers. But the Duke sent not only flowers, but also jewelry, and the maid opened one of the boxes, but that was far from all. The princess couldn't even believe that she would actually have to accept all this, because the flowers and jewelry were simply incredible. She even suggested that she should return everything when she and the Duke divorced, but she hoped that wearing it would take away everything down to the last gift. Deciding to think about it later, the princess said that they needed to take what they could use right now, and the rest was to be kept sealed. The wedding gift made an incredible impression on all the maids and Inez, who certainly could not have expected anything like this from the cold-blooded Duke. As she looked closely at the gifts, she became increasingly convinced that each of the items looked luxurious and absurdly expensive. And the first thing the princess thought about was how much money she would be able to get if she decided to sell all of this. One box caught her attention, and the lady felt that it was absolutely necessary to open it right now. Inside the box was a necklace with a huge purple stone that looked exactly like the holy relic from the original story. In the original, Sorel suddenly discovered a relic on the battlefield, a relic that could seal the legendary divine beast. Then she thought it was just a beautiful crystal that glowed with a strange purple hue. But the moment she reached out her hand to him, the divine beast awakened, and this incident caused a solar eclipse across the entire continent. Evnes remembered that the original relic was definitely not that small, and the crystal was said to be the size of a massive boulder. And looking at the luxurious decoration with a crystal, she wondered what it could be. She asked the maid to call the knight who had delivered the gifts from the Duke to ask him a few questions. The young man came to the venerable lady and asked why Her Highness wished to see him. Evnes wanted to ask about a necklace and decided to find out if the knight knew where the Duke had managed to acquire it. He said that this decoration is a family heirloom, passed down through the family of the venerable Duke. And only now did the heroine realize that in her hands, she was holding an incredibly valuable piece of jewelry, which was the property of the ducal family. There was nothing strange about this, and she could safely receive expensive gifts, but Evnes was sure that she would have to return the necklace as soon as they divorced. Perhaps this crystal has its own legend, and she asked the knight if there were any special features about this gemstone. But after thinking for a moment, the young man replied that he had never heard anything like this and did not have such information. The stone definitely looked like a relic from history, but it could also be an ordinary crystal, and there is nothing strange about the existence of precious stones. The knight was worried that there was something wrong with this necklace, because the lady could not have called him just like that. She only asked to convey her deep gratitude to the Duke, and respectfully dismissed the gentleman. And the princess herself decided to wait for the appearance of Lady Sorel, which was supposed to happen very soon, given the plot of the novel. A few days later, the maids were going about their usual work duties, and one of them asked where the girl was going. The maid was about to bring some oils to Her Majesty's bedroom, but she was still resting in the living room, and another maid asked her to relax. The girls noticed that the lady had really changed a lot lately, and she had become completely different. Previously, the maids were very afraid of their mistress, but now everyone without exception liked her because the princess turned out to be sweet and kind. After all, the princess was marrying a duke, and the maids were sure that Evnes would definitely be in a good mood after the wedding. But they could not understand the reason why the lady suddenly became soft. Probably, in fact, the reason was completely different. One of the maids knew that due to the consequences of the hunger strike, the mistress had lost her memory, so much so that she had even forgotten who she really was. Since then, the princess never made a scandal and walked around without gloves, not at all like she had done before. At first, the personal maid was incredibly worried about this, but now everyone began to adore the princess, and she too was delighted with the new relationship with the mistress. After a pleasant tea party with the maids, one of them was about to leave because Her Highness should have already left the living room. She thanked the girls for the delicious cookies and wished them good luck in their work endeavors. Holding a porcelain decanter in her hands, the lady walked towards her mistress, but suddenly she saw one of her acquaintances. It was a maid named Lana, and she looked at the other maid with apprehension. Lana never made friends with the other maids, and she probably had her own reasons for that. But as soon as she saw the maid walking towards the mistress, she decided to disgrace her, and when the girl stumbled, the porcelain decanter flew out of her hands and shattered into pieces. The worst thing was that this decanter contained expensive perfume oil, which the maid was going to take to her mistress. Lana said that the girl should be more careful because she probably knows how important this bottle is for her highness. But the maid was sure that Lana had deliberately tripped her so that the girl would trip and break the decanter. Lana stated that she had no evidence, and if the lady liked her, it did not give her a reason to accuse others. The lady never interacted with the other maids and did not understand how the mistress could keep such a clumsy person with her, and probably she wanted to take her place. Looking at the fallen maid, the girl decided to go about her business and angrily declared that she needed to go to work. But she had no idea that the entire time the princess herself was observing the situation from the second floor. And she saw all the details of what happened, as well as the fact that Lana brazenly tripped up another maid. The heroine continued to look at the maids, wondering how she should react to this, since Lana, for some reason, was trying to set up her personal maid. She immediately approached Nell and asked if everything was okay with her, because Ivness had seen everything with her own eyes. Of Venus, she said that she saw everything perfectly well, and how Lana deliberately put her foot in it, and another maid, Chloe, can also confirm this. She turned to Lana, stating that everyone had clearly seen how she had tripped him, and asked what lie the girl was going to come up with this time to justify herself. But since the maid was caught red-handed, there were other people who could also prove her guilt. So Lana fell to her knees before her mistress and screamed that she was completely innocent and asked for forgiveness. The princess suggested, first of all, to apologize to the lady whom she had just brazenly offended. With tears in her eyes, Lana asked the maid for forgiveness, stating that she had simply envied her for a moment. Nell had never been a conflicted girl, and she could not even think that any of the maids were jealous of her. She had no intention of holding a grudge against any of her colleagues, and only quietly asked that she not do it again. The princess was glad that foresight led her here, and she managed to punish the guilty and resolve the situation. In fact, this morning when she touched, she saw a premonition of herself falling and breaking a vase of incense, and the princess was afraid that her personal maid would get hurt, but fortunately, everything turned out well. The princess asked to tell the head maid about what happened so that she could punish the young employee according to all the rules. She invited her personal maid to come when she had finished her business. Today was the day of the meeting with the Duke, so the princess understood that it was time for her to prepare for a pleasant visit. After her reincarnation, the princess had a wonderful relationship with the maids, and she has never gotten angry or yelled at anyone since then. Nell came to her mistress's room to prepare her for going out, but suddenly the girl noticed something strange. The princess saw that there was a small wound on the maid's hand and asked if she was okay, since she probably got it when she fell. The maid seemed to have cut her hand on the shards of the vase, but admitted that she did not feel any pain at all. But if the wound is left like this, she will probably have a scar, so the princess asked Chloe to bring medicine. The maid assured her that she was perfectly fine and needed absolutely nothing, but Eveness insisted on her own. She carefully anointed the maid's wound and asked her to try to keep water out of the area for a while. The mistress had never been so kind to her servants before, and they still could not believe that the girl had changed so much. It was then that the maid realized the full depth of her gratitude. Her mistress's care was not just a manifestation of a kind heart, but also a real gift that warmed the soul and filled it with hope. The maids were ready to serve their mistress faithfully and truly, giving all their love and devotion in response to her kindness, because such care is a rare gift that must be cherished and appreciated. The velvet curtains of the carriage, dazzling white, swayed slightly, letting in the timid rays of the setting sun. Inside, an atmosphere of peace reigned, broken only by the measured clatter of hooves on the cobbled road. The princess, dressed in a dress of the finest pink silk, embroidered with silver threads, sat like an ivory statuette, motionless and beautiful. The meeting with the Duke was to take place in the tea garden, which turned out to be beautiful and charming. The heroine noticed that it was warm here, unlike the street, and that a magic spell had clearly been cast to control the temperature. Duke Terence arrived to meet the princess, wearing a uniform embroidered with gold thread, emphasizing his high status, and his face maintained an imperturbable expression. The princess admitted that this place was incredibly beautiful, and she was very pleased that the Duke invited her to such a cozy place. The young man suddenly asked if she really wanted him to give her this luxurious blooming garden. And these words sounded very strange, because Villainess had only told about how delighted she was with the tea garden. As it turned out, this garden belonged to the Duke, and he had 3 more such beautiful places with fragrant, magnificent flowers. Therefore, he was ready to give the tea garden to the princess if she liked it. The princess smiled and asked how she would manage such a place, since she had absolutely no experience in it. She admitted that she had already received enough engagement gifts, but the young man was sure that these were different things. But in any case, he was glad that the girls liked it here. She decided to ask about the special piece of jewelry that had been given as an engagement gift. The Duke wanted to know if the lady liked the necklace, and now was the best time to find out about this decoration in detail. The princess asked if this was some kind of special decoration, like it was connected to a divine beast or something like that. From the young man's surprised face, it was clear that he had absolutely no idea what she was talking about and would probably now ask what kind of nonsense she was talking about. Unfortunately, the Duke had never heard anything like this about this decoration, and the princess began to suspect that she was probably mistaken. Suddenly, men approached them and greeted the princess and the Grand Duke with special respect. Villainess did not recognize any of the men, and only assumed that these young men were acquaintances of the gentleman. One of the guests admitted that he did not expect to meet them here at all, and this meeting turned out to be too unexpected. The princess needed to show good relations with the Duke, and she wondered what she should do. At this moment, the Duke himself took the girl by the hand and told the young men that he wanted to show the princess the recently opened garden. That is why I invited her here personally, so that she could be the first to see the unique beauty of nature. The princess was even a little frightened when the Duke suddenly touched her hand, or simply admitted that his words were indeed true. In order not to disturb the couple in love, the guest decided to take his leave and apologized for such an unexpected intrusion. Villainess was also a little scared when the guests suddenly appeared, but she quickly calmed herself down because now she was not in any danger. But for some reason, the Duke suggested looking at her intently immediately after he touched the fingers of her gentle hand. The Duke had long wanted to know whether it was necessary to hold hands in order for the princess to enter the vision. A simple touch would have been enough, but the heroine admitted that she could not touch anyone just like that. She asked with a smile if the Duke was interested in knowing the future again, and she would be happy to watch it again. She extended her hand, and the young man put his strong male palm in it, completely trusting the girl. And since she could see anything related to the future, he politely asked her to take a look at least once. The Duke's behavior was a little strange, and the princess did not understand why her wearer suddenly began to behave differently. The heroine didn't even understand whether he was serious now or just decided to joke with her, because his facial expression was completely unclear. She held his hand, and the young man wanted to know if the girl was able to see anything. The princess smiled and apologized, but unfortunately today, her gift didn't seem to work. The Duke even suggested that perhaps he wouldn't have anything special in the near future, although most likely her ability was simply working randomly. After the last ball, people began to show interest, so the Duke announced that the Emperor would soon respond, and the princess asked how well the Duke played, since in the original, he was incredibly bad. Perhaps the young man was nervous at the time, which is why he was drawn to a girl named Sorel. Terence apologized for his frankness, but suddenly he said very strange words. That Villainess really plays terribly, and the lady couldn't understand at all what was being discussed. The princess sighed and fell silent, and an awkward pause arose between the heroes because the heroine did not know what to answer. She didn't understand why the young man decided to say that and called her game terrible. Because was it really that she played awkwardly? For some reason, the heroine heard in her memory the words that Sorel had originally spoken, and in her opinion, the Duke had to be good at everything. Besides, she didn't understand why Terence decided to openly express his indignation, because in the original, he actually played much worse. She tried to calm down so she could understand what the Duke really meant when he said those words. In the original novel, he confessed to Sorel that up until that time he had never played at love. At this point, the princess remembered and replied that her acting might indeed seem awkward. She decided to repeat the Duke's words from the original and admitted that she had never played the game of love before. Trying to follow the storyline and dialogue, the princess continued to stare at the Duke. The young man admitted that the princess seemed to have gone through the same period that he had experienced in his life. But for some reason, the Duke's expression was sad, and Ivnes even assumed that she had just made a mistake. The Duke's father was a man who adored all women, but his own mother died early. And now the princess was most afraid that this phrase touched upon the Grand Duke's unhappy past. She probably said something unnecessary and didn't know what to do now, deciding to change the subject as quickly as possible. In fact, today, the young man wanted to tell her his mansion and inner chambers. But due to the recent snowstorm, the furniture could not be delivered, so the preparations were not yet complete. In about 3 days, everything would be ready, and only after that, he said that the princess could come to visit him. The Duke invited Inessa to visit him today if she had free time, and it was convenient for her. By the way, the Duke's younger brother lives in this same estate, and the princess understood that out of politeness, she needed to ask about him. She asked when she moved to the estate if she could meet his brother, and knowing the princess's character, he would never allow her. But the Duke happily agreed and promised that as soon as the lady moved in with him, they would definitely meet. Ivnes expected a completely different reaction, because the Duke should have told her not to even dream about it. Besides, the Duke's younger brother had long wanted to meet the princess, and he would definitely be delighted by her visit. It seemed that the heroes had managed to get a little closer, and the Duke had just been muttering about the game, but had immediately acknowledged their cooperation. Before the meeting, the princess was going to go to the store to buy a gift for his younger brother. A gift was the best way to win the heart of any child, and the Duke was surprised that the princess was even going to prepare an unusual gift. She wanted the young man to go shopping with her and asked if he was willing to go with her. Judging by the surprised look on the young man's face, he didn't even expect that the princess was going to give his brother a gift. He happily agreed to go along to suggest to the girl which toy would suit the lot. In the Empress's palace, everything was not very calm because she received an order from His Majesty. As soon as the Empress opened the message, her face became gloomy. The Emperor was clearly asking to postpone the princess's wedding. She asked her assistant if he knew why the Emperor had decided to give such an order. But unfortunately, the young man could not know the thoughts of His Majesty and only obediently conveyed his request. The Empress did not understand why the Emperor made such a decision, because it would have been better if the princess had married the Duke, despite the fact that the situation had now changed greatly. Like the late Empress, the Empress grew up as a beloved princess in her own country, but after moving to the Empire, she lived a lonely life. Besides, the Emperor always loved another girl more than her, so it was even harder for her. In the end, the Empress, exhausted by mental suffering, was very ill and died very early. In the Empress's opinion, Ivnes should have suffered as well, but everything had been going too strangely in the last few days. She was happy and danced with the Duke at the ball, and soon after, the Duke sent her the most expensive gifts. But even in this case, the Empress could not understand why His Majesty decided to act this way. He didn't even want to marry the princess off to another noble family, because then the power in the Grand Duke's family would increase, and she was sure that the Emperor should be happy that the Duke was crazy about Inessa. Looking at the message, the Empress became angry because she did not understand how, in the end, she had to postpone the wedding, for which preparations were already underway. The lady frantically crumpled the piece of paper and could not imagine why the emperor had given such an order. The assistant felt awkward talking about it, but he admitted that he had heard that the princess had been unwell until recently, and he confessed to the empress that he was still not sure whether her daughter had managed to fully recover before the wedding. The empress understood the hint of the assistant and knew that it would not be good if the bride suddenly fell ill. For some reason, she most often thought about difficult ways, but her assistant suggested a simple way, because if Villainess got sick, the wedding would be postponed automatically. A carriage drawn by white horses pulled up to the palace, their manes fluttering in the wind like silk, and their hooves, touching the pavement, beat out a clear rhythm. The carriage's interior, trimmed with gold and velvet, shone in the rays of the setting sun, reflecting grandeur and power. The princess stepped out of the carriage, her dress looking as if it were woven from morning dew, seeming unearthly, and her long hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her eyes, deep and thoughtful, reflected not only beauty, but also wisdom beyond her youth. The Grand Duke greeted the princess with respect and thanked her for visiting him with her presence. Standing next to the Duke was his younger brother, who had long wanted to meet his brother's future bride. Duke Lot's young brother, who had previously been more familiar with the dust of libraries and the ringing of blades in the training yard, saw the princess for the first time. The princess looked sweetly at the young gentleman and admitted that she had been very much looking forward to meeting him and had even prepared for this visit. In fact, she even brought him a gift and invited the boy to look at it. The boy did not expect at all that the princess would bring him a gift, and he looked at his mistress with surprised eyes. The Duke helped the princess choose a gift, and she heard that the young man wanted to become an admiral, so she asked to make an exact copy of a warship. Lot happily took the large model of the ship in his hands and sincerely thanked the princess for such pleasant attention, because he really liked this gift. The Duke's brother admitted that he had actually also prepared a wedding gift for the two of them and would really like the heroes to take a look at it, and it was incredibly sweet. She could hardly believe that this sweet boy was the Grand Duke's younger brother, and confessed that she would very much like to see the wedding present. And at that moment, the Duke watched in amazement as his young brother immediately got along with his future wife. The princess went into the boy's room, and he happily showed her two wedding figurines of a man and a woman. These two little dolls looked incredibly like Villainess and the Duke, and the princess decided to ask more about them. After all, the resemblance was obvious, and the sweet lady holding a wedding bouquet in her hands stood next to the dark-haired young man. For a child, this composition was made quite detailed, and the princess was surprised, asking what the two magnificent dolls were made of. Lot opened his box and explained that the craft was made from a certain material, which is why it looks so realistic. The material the dolls were made of felt much softer and denser than the glue, and having touched it, the princess could not even understand what it was and what this material was called. From this material, Lot had already made many dolls that looked more like monsters than like people. In fact, in order to make a realistic doll of the princess, the boy asked the knights to describe her appearance, and they replied that the princess always looks angry. That's why her gaze is piercing, like that of the most terrible monster. The boy asked many people, and some knights said that the lady's hair stuck out in all directions and sometimes resembled snakes. It was in this guise that the knights of the Grand Duke's house saw the princess, and only now did she realize how bad her reputation was, since the young man presented her as a real villain. So the boy trained for a long time to sculpt a realistic figurine, but it turned out surprisingly cute, and in the end, he made it based on what his older brother told him. The figure really did look more like the princess than the others, and Evans was surprised that Terence had painted it that way, for she was sure that the young man had painted it in the most horrible way. The boy began to worry that perhaps the princess would not like the meaningless gift, but she admitted that it was simply magnificent, and if Lot gave it to her, she would cherish these toys for the rest of her life. After her words, the boy was incredibly happy, and promised to finish the toys before the wedding so that he could give them away right at the ceremony. He even offered to look at the room in which the lady had to stay until the wedding, and was sure that she would definitely like it. The maid came to see her mistress off, and she confessed to Lot that she would be looking forward to his wedding present. Lot turned out to be a very nice boy and treated the princess much warmer than she expected, and considering the wedding gift, perhaps the Grand Duke spoke well of her. The maid showed the mistress's new room, in which she was to stay until the solemn day of the wedding. The quarters provided for her in the Duke's palace exceeded her wildest expectations. She was accustomed to the luxury of royal castles, but here there was a sense of refined taste. Every piece of furniture had been chosen with special love and care. Heavy velvet curtains, caught by gold tassels, dimmed the bright daylight, and in the center of the room stood a four-poster bed made of the finest silk, embroidered with silver threads. The maid said that if the girl didn't like something, she could immediately say so, and any flaw would be corrected in an instant. This room was larger than any other room in the palace, and the view from the window was simply beautiful, so the princess loved absolutely everything about it. She asked where the Grand Duke was now, and according to the maid, he should now be in the northern garden next to the mansion. The young man was all alone in the garden, lost in his childhood memories and thoughts. When he was still a boy, many events took place in his family that left an indelible impression on the Duke's soul. One day, a message came to the palace that there had been an attack, an attempted murder, and His Grace the Grand Duke had become a key link in this event. It was officially confirmed that the carriage overturned as a result of the accident, and the Duke's mother died tragically. Her sudden death left a thick, impenetrable mourning in the castle, as if a veil had fallen over the once bright halls, silencing the cheerful laughter and the clinking of glasses. The funeral ceremony, despite his age, was etched into the boy's memory like sharp fragments the cold gray stone of the ancient church, the mournful faces of the courtiers, the whisper of prayers hanging in the air, and the lingering, oppressive feeling of loss. He, small and confused, was held by the hand by a lady, but he felt infinitely alone in this sea of grief. It was then, at her grave, that he first saw the white bouquet of flowers from the sacred tree, as if woven from moonlight, contrasting with the dark stone and the gloomy mood. He did not know who laid these flowers, but from then on, the white bouquet was associated with his mother, with her tenderness and love, which he lost so early. At that moment, the princess approached the Duke, and he asked her what impression she was under after viewing her personal room. Villainess noted with admiration that the room was truly stunning, and she loved absolutely everything about it, down to the smallest details. When she approached, he was standing in front of his mother's grave, because she saw a painfully familiar bouquet. Having fulfilled the princess's request, he laid the flowers of the sacred tree that she gave him, but she did not even think that he would do it anyway. If you remember, yesterday was the anniversary of the death of the late Grand Duchess, and time really did fly by. The Duke said that he had recently reviewed the situation in the south, and it seemed that he did not need to be there in person. There were definitely signs of rebellion, but the Emperor probably exaggerated everything, and it seems he wanted to distract the Duke's attention. The young man was absolutely sure of this, and he planned to cancel the events as soon as he reported the real state of affairs, and this was excellent news, because now the Grand Duke would be safe. Terence said that new information had come to light, and that Sir Garin had just recently met with the Empress. Judging by all the circumstances, it seems that the message came directly from the Emperor, since it was his assistant who recently honored the Empress with his presence. This evening, the heroine could not find a place for herself after her recent conversation with the Duke. The maid looked after her mistress with care, but she still could not relax and stop thinking about the news that the Emperor had received. When she spoke with the Duke, the young man reported that they had received a message from the Emperor, and it had been delivered surprisingly quickly. He asked the princess not to worry under any circumstances, because even if rumors about them spread, they would in no way be able to harm the girl. Evans also tried to think so, because even if she were killed right now, it would be difficult to accuse the Grand Duke of the crime he had committed. Even though she said so in conversation, she didn't think that the Emperor would give up the idea of destroying them, and perhaps he had a new plan to lure her and Terence into a new trap. The heroine needed to find out before anything happened, but this news was too unexpected for her. While the maid was combing the lady's hair, she suddenly cried out, admitting that she was just a little surprised. But to her great surprise, she saw in front of her not her personal maid, but the girl who had tripped Nell. The princess was sure that Lana had been reprimanded and probably should have been punished. But she said that thanks to the headmaid's forgiveness, she was able to return to work soon. The princess was disappointed that the maid had taken up her duties so quickly and asked to give her the comb back, suggesting that she think again about her behavior. When Lana handed the mistress the comb, the girl lightly touched her hands, and this meant that a new vision awaited her. The heroine's consciousness seemed to be spinning in a magical whirlwind, and she felt that she had to move to a completely different place. In her vision, she found herself in some strange room that looked very much like a warehouse. The lady walked inside cautiously and suddenly heard the voices of two girls who were talking about how one of them should not be noticed. She saw a maid standing next to the lady and assuring her that she had done everything as she was told. The princess recognized the voice, and it was the maid Lana, who was probably going to harm Nell again. Lana insisted that something strange happened, and she became scared when the crazy princess started screaming that she had a headache as soon as she swallowed it. It was a concentrated potion made from leaves, a remedy that was not lethal, but could be harmful to health. The heroine managed to overhear a conversation that it was Her Majesty the Empress who gave this potion and ordered it to be used in some way. And as soon as Ivnes heard that they were talking about the Empress, puzzles that she had not even suspected immediately came together in her head. The next moment, she found herself back in her room, and this vision was very strange, because thanks to it, the princess managed to learn something. She asked Lana to leave, admitting that she was just a little tired and wanted to be alone. And after the maid left her room, the princess had a lot to figure out, because she had just learned a certain truth. Judging by her appearance, soon the maid Lana will add a potion to her food, and its consumption will cause the princess a severe headache. And the one who prepared this potion was the Empress, who asked the maid to put it in her daughter's food. The princess realized that the Empress wanted to postpone the wedding in order to plan a new murder in which no one would be suspected. In this way, they wanted to make the girl look sick, because if the bride gets sick, the wedding will be postponed indefinitely anyway. After this vision, the princess thought for a long time about what to do, and even suggested that it would be better to banish the maid Lana to another palace so that she could avoid minor danger. Perhaps through Lana, she would be able to see the future and the danger would only increase, but the princess was determined to save her own life at any cost. A few days later, the princess was sitting in a flower garden, trying to sort out her thoughts and the visions that had recently occurred. Ivans asked the maid if she had managed to call Sir Sheldon here, with whom she probably had an appointment. Just yesterday, the princess ordered him to be invited, and also invited the Grand Duke to come this afternoon. The maid fulfilled all of the mistress's requests without any problems, and at that very moment, a noble young man appeared before her. It was a fair-haired, stately man named Michael Sheldon who came to greet the great princess. The young man arrived immediately after he was informed that the princess herself wanted to see him as soon as possible. Having settled down comfortably next to Ivnes, he politely asked for what purpose she wanted to see him, and then the princess decided to get straight to the point. There was a necklace with green gems on the table, and the lady promised to give it to Michael if he would do her a favor. Looking at the necklace, the young man's face immediately changed, as if he saw something familiar. Mikhail frowned his light eyebrows and just wanted to know where the princess got this necklace from. The princess was incredibly amused by the expression on Mikhail's face, and she admitted that she had managed to find one of the relics again. It was definitely worth it, because the necklace was a precious heirloom that belonged to the Sorrel family. Princess Ivnes, who hated Sorrel to the core, once threw the necklace into the pond right in front of her when a major conflict broke out between the girls. Then the Villainess ordered the servants to immediately find the necklace, and perhaps she did it first, because she thought that Sorrel would be able to find out the whole truth later, and the heroine was very well versed in such matters. Thanks to this, she was able to use the necklace that had once been thrown away, and it was probably no longer worth saying what was well made and what was not. Because as soon as Mikhail saw this necklace, He was immediately ready to fulfill any conditions and asked what exactly the lady wanted. The heroine said that one of her maids had a suspicious potion, and she would like to know the whole truth about it, how she managed to get it, and who ordered it to be done. Perhaps Mikhail already knew something, but now he made a surprised face and looked completely unsuspecting. The princess stated that she was sure that someone was trying to poison her, and she even knew who this person was and where he would later meet his accomplice. But the problem was that the most important evidence that could help her avoid terrible events in the future was missing. Therefore, the heroine admitted that she would like Mikhail to bring the knights here when she needs it, and now she needs his help more than ever. After listening to the girl's request, Mikhail understood the seriousness of the situation and promised that he would help protect the princess, because this was his main duty. The princess gratefully appreciated the gentleman's help, but asked not to investigate this openly, because the killers could destroy the evidence or begin to deny everything, so the information must be kept in the strictest confidence. Michael promised to act in accordance with the princess's order, realizing that the situation was indeed too serious. The princess was sure that she and Mikhail were alone, but at that moment she realized that someone else was ready to join the meeting. The Duke stood before her in a black tuxedo, holding a lovely bouquet of flowers, and his appearance was too unexpected. After all, the heroine clearly remembered that she had asked the Duke to come during the day, but for some reason he had come at a completely different time, and she had to find out the reason for Terrence's appearance, who had definitely come here for a reason, knowing that the princess was supposed to meet with Mikhail.